The treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash. Text prize to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 5th of March.
Media blackout. The Princess of Wales has been seen for the first time in months, but the British press are refusing to show the paparazzi picture. An American outlet has plastered the photos across the internet, which is the right approach.
The government strikes a new deal with France, yet another one in her crackdown on people smuggling gangs. It comes as new figures reveal that yesterday a record number for a single day this year illegally entered the UK.
And Birmingham City Council is set to slash bin collections, dim streetlights and raise taxes. The Labour-run council was forced to declare bankruptcy after spending nearly £1 billion on equal pay claims going back years.
It really is astonishing, this Birmingham story. There have been a number of councils that have gone bankrupt. Croydon is another famous one. But the Birmingham story is bigger than any other. And spending over £1 billion on back payments and legal fees around all of these equal pay claims, it's just astonishing, the incompetence of this council.
Yes, so certain workers, those working primarily indoors, claimed that they were being paid less than those working outdoors, for example, bin men, and so equal pay claims aplenty came along and the councils had to splurge £1 billion on back payments. It's quite incredible.
Despite the fact that they're different jobs, because the equal pay legislation in the Equal Pay Act and the Equality Act aren't about equal pay for the same jobs. They're equal pay for this nebulous concept, the same value, which means different jobs can sue a local authority or whoever else and say we must be paid the same, even though they're different jobs.
I mean, it's quite incredible, isn't it? And what happens now? What happens to the people of Birmingham? They will have their lights dimmed, most likely. They will have their bin collections go from weekly to fortnightly. And what else? They'll have to pay huge amounts more tax, by the looks of things. Anyway, there's a vote today. Let us know what you make of this all. Are councils just wasting our money? And what about that equal pay aspect? GBviews at gbnews.com. We'll also be speaking to Suella Braverman later in the show, but let's get your headlines.
Emily, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The NHS could be facing real-term funding cuts of £2 billion as the Chancellor comes under pressure ahead of tomorrow's budget. Analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests the health service could suffer a 1.2% cut in day-to-day spending across England. It could mean the health service is forced to cut staffing or pay despite rising costs and a promise to tackle waiting lists. The warning comes after the King held an in-person pre-budget audience with Jeremy Hunt this morning at Buckingham Palace. Business Minister Greg Hand told GB News the government is being responsible.
The government intervened well and correctly over recent years, for example, during the pandemic, in terms of the supporting people to remain in employment, the fact the government paid a big part of people's energy bills over the last couple of winters. I think people support that. That is why there's been an increase in public spending. But, as I said earlier, the economy is now turning a corner, and that then sets us up nicely to be able to afford things like tax cuts.
But Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth says the budget won't be enough and it's time for an election.
It's why I think now, after 14 years of the Conservatives, it really is time for change. But I think that opportunity for change is coming, because I think there's going to be a May general election. Lots of gossip swirling around in this place about a May general election. And I think Rishi Sunak, and this is my demand for Rishi Sunak, I'm sure he's watching GB News this morning, my demand to Rishi Sunak is name the date.
Anticipation's building ahead of the Chancellor's budget, with experts suggesting that any cuts to courts, police or local authorities may not be realistic. We asked local residents in Glasgow and in East Yorkshire what they want to see in the budget.
I'd like to see him listen to the people as well for a change. They seem to give all these promises and never keep them.
It'd be nice for the petrol to go down and stop putting money on council tax and stuff like that. People can't afford it.
Businesses are struggling at the moment, the market's struggling, so I think they just need a little bit of a more stable background in the economy.
Raise your tax allowance, because now some pensioners are going to find themselves in a tax bracket.
Passengers narrowly escaped injury this morning when a bus crashed into a shop front in central London. These are live pictures coming to us from New Oxford Street. If you're watching on television, you can see the double-decker bus there after it crashed into all bar one. The incident happened in a busy part of the city as commuters were making their way into work. We understand that no injuries were reported. The Rwanda bill suffered another series of defeats in the House of Lords last night, in many cases by unusually large margins of more than 100 votes. Peers backed 5 changes to the government's flagship immigration bill, including an assurance that the safety of Rwanda can be challenged in the courts. Nearly 50 amendments were tabled, with more to be voted on today. However, the scale of last night's defeat raises the chances of a drawn-out tussle between the Lords and the Commons. Meanwhile, the Home Office has confirmed just over 400 migrants crossed the English Channel in 7 small boats yesterday, the highest number on a single day this year. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it was a symptom of what she called incompetent leadership by the Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak made stopping small boat crossings one of his key election pledges. An agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing dispute. The British Medical Association and the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to the strikes, while the Prime Minister said it's proof that seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward for everyone. A woman has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a 10-year-old girl was found dead in the West Midlands. Police said they found the child with injuries at an address in Sandwell yesterday afternoon. She was confirmed dead at the scene. A 33-year-old woman understood to be known to the girl has been arrested and taken into custody. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 12, and the Princess of Wales has been seen in public for the first time since her abdominal surgery in January, alongside her mother, Carol Middleton.
Yes, it comes after it was claimed last night that Kate's black sheep uncle, Gary Goldsmith, was scolded after signing up to celebrity Big Brother amid fears he could spill secrets about the royal family. Well, there you go. It looks like he's already laid into Prince Harry a little. Joining us to discuss this is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Now, we talked about at the top of the show a media blackout. It's funny, isn't it, how we have pictures of the princess plastered across American outlets, yet in Britain, broadcasters make the decision and the press makes the decision not to.
Yeah, this was an unauthorised paparazzi photograph, which, as you said, was published by a US magazine last night. It is quite an intrusive photograph. It shows the Princess of Wales in the passenger seats of a car wearing black sunglasses, being driven by her mother, Carol Middleton. It's understood that the photograph was taken just after 9 o'clock, so they would have been returning from a school run. It was on the road near Windsor. It was a public road. In theory, there's nothing wrong with taking photographs in public, but I think this is a taste and decency thing, and I think the British media have decided not to publish the image. We feel that the Princess of Wales is entitled to privacy to recover in private, but of course, what that doesn't stop, and clearly the palace can't control, is the social media images, well, the images going on social media and going viral for the world to see if they wish to do so. But on a positive note, what it has done is quashed some of those perhaps slightly more distasteful rumours which have been swirling online over the last couple of weeks about the state of the Princess of Wales's health, because it does show her in the passenger seat of a car. So clearly she is well enough to get in the car, and therefore perhaps we should be slightly reassured from that. But I suspect Kensington Palace are not too pleased with the idea of unofficial and unauthorised photographs being taken of the princess.
Cameron, this is where my slightly conspiratorial mindset kicks into gear, because obviously we'd seen a crescendo of rumour, of salacious gossip online, all sorts of suggestions about where the Princess of Wales was, ranging from the, frankly, parody-like to the more serious allegations. And then suddenly we see this picture that is also released the day that the Princess of Wales' uncle enters a reality television programme. Is there some slice of this just all that seems a bit too convenient? Perhaps the Princess of Wales chose to get in that seat, in that car, on that public road, because all of that rumour was getting too much.
I doubt it, to be honest, and I think if you spin it on its head, Tom, perhaps the newspaper publication in question, or the US website, and the photographer were very, very keen to try and snap a picture of the Princess of Wales because of all the rumour, and they knew how well it would do online and in the United States. But obviously, never say never. But also, adding to the Gary Goldsmith stuff with Big Brother, the Princess, the British Army even has announced that the Princess of Wales is going to be attending a Trooping the Colour rehearsal on the 8th of June, but Kensington Palace, it's understood, was not consulted about this British Army announcement. And not only that, it appears that only they can announce officially if the Princess is going to be taking part. So it's very, very murky. It's not been guaranteed that the Princess is taking part in that engagement. However, it would be, if true, the first public engagement announced post-abdominal surgery. But of course, all of this, the timing is significant. There's been so many things happening all at once today.
Yeah,
with the
very
princess.
interesting, very interesting. And just lastly, Gary Goldsmith in Celebrity Big Brother.
Yeah.
Seems he's already had something to say about his royal connections, but also he's spoken to The Sun.
Yeah, he's done a big interview with The Sun where he really sings Kate's praises, his niece, saying that she's beautiful on the outside as well as on the inside. He also slates Harry and Meghan, saying that he Harry threw his family under a bus, particularly when it came to the Princess of Wales. He also called out Omid Scobie's biography Endgame, or the royal book Endgame, saying that it's absolute, a word I can't repeat on television in the daytime. Kate is 100% not racist, neither is Carol, Kate's mother. This is referring to the Dutch translation of the book, which appears to allege that the Princess of Wales questions what colour Archie's skin would be when he was born, which Kensington Palace haven't commented on. He said, but Gary, her uncle, said that it's absolute rubbish and it's ridiculous.
I find it very hard to believe that the Princess would want him to be saying such things to a tabloid newspaper, but hey, we don't know. Thank you very much indeed, Cameron Walker, GBNews royal correspondent.
He had a very good answer for the idea that, OK, you know, there's all of this speculation online and the picture appears well. It could be that just the American outlets will now pay the big bucks for those paparazzi pictures, sure. There's a bit of me that still thinks, why did she get in the car? If she's sort of laying low, suddenly all this speculation...
Well, maybe she just had to travel and, you know, there's only so many ways you could... It was probably through, you know, well... maybe. Let us know what you think at home. Anyway, joining us now to discuss this further is former Royal Protection Officer Dave Davies. Thank you very much, indeed, for joining us. Well, that's a question. Should we put that to him?
Let's put... Di, what do you think about this idea that perhaps this wasn't all accidental, that the Princess deliberately got in that car, deliberately got on that school run, because of all the speculation about where she is?
Well, good afternoon. The straight answer would be no, I don't think it's any kind of conspiracy. I'm delighted the Princess is feeling better so that she can. And it's a presumption that she was going to or from the school. What concerns me more is the security implication. Where was the backup? How was a photographer able to get this direct photograph? It reminds me of the issues what happened in the south of France, although they were more salacious in the fact that she was photographed with very little clothes on. It also reminds me of Edward VIII going back into the 30s, where the Americans were publishing all manner of pictures with him and Mrs. Simpson. Here we are again, the Americans doing this. I think the British press are to be commended for the fact that they have not published it and they have been restrained in doing anything. On the other hand, you know, there's so much speculation as to what was really wrong with her, etc., etc. So, but on balance, I don't think it's reasonable, and I would hope that somebody gets a grip of this and stops this nonsense as far as she's concerned.
Well, Di, remind us, as a former Royal Protection Officer yourself, remind us the lengths the paparazzi go to and what techniques they use to get up close to the royals to get these kind of shots.
Well, they obviously can use long lenses, and today's cameras are way advanced to the ones when Diana was around, when I was in overall command of royalty protection. So things have moved on. You know, I'm no cameraman, but clearly now they can be some way away. What always worries me is the protection that surrounds our royals and how good that protection should be. Clearly, given a choice, I wouldn't have her mother driving her. I would have a protection officer who's highly trained, because in this day and age, you never know what can come at you or your principals. And I'd always want to know that there were support structures if and when she's going anywhere these days. It always has been the case. So I wonder where and how and when this was actually taken. But my concern really is the security. And if somebody like this photographer, and let's face it, Princess Diana, that photograph with Dobie was worth about £250,000. So I wonder what this chap has been, or female has been paid for it. I wonder.
No, they're big questions. But I suppose just finally, with regard to what we would expect the normal security of the Princess of Wales and her mother, might they have been in this car by themselves? Might there have not been... Whenever I've seen a royal motorcade, I see outriders, I see policemen on their motorcycles, but I suppose that's not always the case for the royals.
No, it's a balance, and it, again, depends on the risk assessment carried out by those charged with protecting both the prince and the princess, and indeed her children. I wouldn't want to comment too much. Clearly, there are contingency plans. Clearly, there are support structures to and from, and I would hope they are in place. But one never discusses the actual how it's done or where it should be done. I think, being the princess, she deserves the highest. I agree with one thing her uncle said. She is a huge asset to this country, and long may she recover, and long may she be the Princess of Wales. I think she's an incredible lady, has never put a foot wrong, and she deserves everything we can give her as a society, in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your expertise and insight, Di Davies, former Royal Protection Officer. Very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, and what a nice note to end on as well. But some breaking news in the past hour. The number of migrants crossing the Channel is now at its highest point since the crisis began.
Wow, more people have crossed in small boats so far this year compared to the same point in any previous year. The government have told us time and time again that they're getting these numbers down and with better figures than last year. It doesn't look like it, does it?
Last year they were down by a third on the year before, but it looks like they could be ticking back up this year.
Does the weather have more to do with it? The Home Office has confirmed that 401 migrants entered the UK illegally yesterday on 7 small boats. It's also the highest number crossing on a single day this year.
Well, it comes as the UK and France agreed a new partnership, yet another one, aimed at smashing Channel people smuggling gangs by disrupting their small boat supply chains.
Well, the Home Secretary James Cleverly made the announcement following a meeting of the Calais Group of Northern European countries yesterday.
And our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us with all of the salacious detail. Now, Mark, how many deals have we seen in the last few years? It seems like every 6 months a new deal is signed between the United Kingdom and France. Although this one, I suppose, is slightly different. It's about criminal gangs.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, this deal actually might be a deal that could bring some tangible benefits in trying to disrupt the people smugglers, because it's all about trying to get various countries in the supply chain involved in coming together, sharing intelligence, cooperating on operations, and trying to disrupt those component parts for the small boats that get shipped from China, where they're usually manufactured in backstreet factories. They're smuggled through multiple countries. They end up in Turkey, and then they make their way through Europe before they are then assembled, of course, on the beaches of northern France. So this customs partnership has got 2 signatories initially. That's the UK and France. It's then being offered to other members of the Calais Group of Northern European countries. So the other signatories or the other members of the Calais Group are Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. They will be invited to join next month. And it's hoped that those countries together can make an impact on these boat parts that are coming in to obviously make the small boats that the migrants are coming across in ever greater numbers. That record day reached yesterday with 401 coming across on 7 small boats.
Mark, that's interesting. So this is about stopping the boat parts, because we've talked quite a lot about why can't they just ban these boats from getting to the coast? Why can't they do something about the manufacturing? This is actually targeted at the boats itself.
Yeah, we've been, many people have been quite vocal for a while in saying, why on earth can't you stop this further upstream? Can't you stop these boats being manufactured in the first place? Well, that might be difficult if they're being manufactured in backstreet factories in China. But yes, the next best thing, of course, is to try to get those component parts as they enter into Turkey and indeed into Europe for their journey to northern France. So this is what this is aimed at, trying to smash this kind of business operation by stopping these component parts reaching northern France. And if they manage to do that, that will make a significant difference in the number of boats that are able to cross. Because I remember a couple of years back when Border Force, the National Crime Agency and some European partners managed to carry out a very significant operation to dismantle a people smuggling gang, and they seized multiple motors and component parts. We then saw quite a significant drop-off for a few months before the people smugglers were able to to restock their supplies.
No, really, really interesting stuff. Mark White, thank you very much for the latest on that and that new deal.
Oh, I'm not sure if you can go after the parts. Is that really going to work? Another manufacturer will just pop up. Just like if you smash one gang, another one pops up. Surely it's about patrolling the border. Has to be about that.
Yeah, they're doing that too, though. They're spending a lot of money patrol and now doing joint patrols as well, which Rishi Sunak says is part of the reason for that third of reductions. But coming up, we're going to be crossing across to Birmingham to get the latest on the council having to make hundreds of millions of pounds in cuts after being declared bankrupt last year. We'll have all the detail for you after this.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You're now in exile. I imagine it wouldn't be safe for you to go back to Russia. Can I ask you if you feel safe personally? And what do you think can be done to remove Putin, or is he going to be there for as long as he wants?
I think that is, of course, fundamental question. It is there should be pressure inside Russia and outside. Inside Russia right now, it's impossible because Putin put all leaders in jail and some of us just abroad. You know, just two were already killed. Mr. Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov, my friend, my collaborator on my party, was killed on the walls on Kremlin. Alexei Navalny was killed in jail and in the camp. And that is, the people live in fear to identify themselves as protesters, to identify themselves as against Putin's regime, etc. That's why today there is no chance for opposition to rise inside Russia. But outside, of course, this war against Ukraine, that is the fundamental issue for all foreign leaders. And in fact, just support of Ukraine and not to let Putin to destroy Ukraine, to defeat Ukraine. That is an important issue because just Ukraine, that's not just in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. Ukraine just fighting for their territorial integrity, but fighting for the whole European countries because after Ukraine, other countries could appear, other subject of aggression could be, and Putin easily could try to test Article 5 of NATO Charter. It could be one of the small countries of Baltic states.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 12 and Birmingham City Council will vote on its 2024 budget this afternoon, but that's not all.
Yes, the council that serves Britain's second biggest city are having to make millions of pounds worth of cuts after they declared bankruptcy last year.
But how will the cuts impact everyday life for the people of Birmingham? And why are the cuts having to be made? Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson reports.
It's a budget that will change the lives of everyone in this city.
After Birmingham City Council declared bankruptcy, it was clear that cuts were on their way, and now this local authority has revealed where the hundreds of millions of pounds worth of funding will be taken away from. £51.5 million is set to be cut from the children's, young people and families' budgets, cuts which have already been protested alongside the end of funding for all community centres. The council will make cuts to city operations in the hope they'll save £39 million in the next year. That includes dimming streetlights. Adult social care will be cut by £23.7 million. Birmingham is the youngest city in Europe, so axing money for youth services will hurt. Sabrina Dennis is the CEO of charity First Class Foundation and works with young people in the West Midlands.
My concerns are the safe spaces, the genuine lack already of safe spaces for young people. I think for that to all of a sudden disappear at a time when, especially in Birmingham, we're seeing so much, poverty, cost of living, violence, youth violence, it's kind of scary. And my concern is I don't actually know what it looks like on the other side.
Elsewhere, there's a worry parts of the city will fall into disrepair.
As you can see at this cemetery, we have potholes in the road, which are very large. We've also got this building behind us, which is derelict, and with council cuts, how are the council going to put these things right in the future?
John Gilmore has been campaigning for the council to better maintain public spaces like cemeteries.
I've had to literally beg the council for over a year to do things which is literally what I would call basic general maintenance of a cemetery, and that can't go on.
But how do people in this city feel about these cuts and council tax rises?
And I just do not see why the existing council taxpayers should be asked to pay to pick up the tab for something that is not their fault.
Disgraceful, really, isn't it, if you listen to it? And all the work they've done on Birmingham and still haven't finished off half the projects.
I mean, I'd certainly be worried about raising council tax. I'd be less worried if I could see a proper plan of how it's going to be spent and what we're going to get as a benefit from that, rather than it just bailing out the council.
In response to the budget, leader of Birmingham City Council John Cotton said, "I want to apologise unreservedly for both the significant spending restrictions and this year's substantial council tax increase. We have no alternative than to face these challenges head on, and we will do whatever is necessary to put the council back on a sound financial footing." With the cuts coming to services and the rising costs for residents, there's dark days ahead for the second city. Jack Carson, GB News, Birmingham.
Right, well, let's speak to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson. Jack, it's hard to overstate what a mess Birmingham City Council is in and the impact this is going to have on ordinary people's lives. Everything is going to be slashed, it seems.
That's right. These cuts worth hundreds of millions of pounds over the next 2 years don't leave any department unscathed, whether it is young people and families in that department, as we were hearing from the youth leader, who's worried that doesn't really know what the other side looks like when all funding for community centres goes over the next couple of years. What is that support for young people? This is the youngest city in Europe, so those services that are maybe particularly more specialised for young people, those campaigners and those charities across this city will have to be trying and finding that extra funding because they can't have it from the council. Additionally, of course, you've got just community spaces, whether it's parks, whether it's cemeteries, whether it's libraries as well, with many of those set to close their doors, that the community is going to lose out. That's not even touching on the likes of funding going from culture and from local theatres, and of course just from generic maintenance of whether it's parks, whether it's £12 million going from the highway maintenance budget, and dimming things like streetlights, which of course some campaigners in the city are saying they are concerned therefore for the impact of safety, particularly of how vibrant of course nightlife here is in the city, and making sure that the streets are well lit and safe enough for people to get home. So these problems stretch all across every single department of this city, and of course that's just the cuts. Then you've got the council tax rises, and everybody that I've been speaking to here in Birmingham wonders, as you heard there, why they're having to pick up the pieces, having to pay the price for the mismanagement of the finances of this council.
Jack, the mismanagement is simply staggering here. £1 billion in back payments for these equal pay claims and all the legal fees associated. But also, was it the wisest idea for this council that was facing bankruptcy to have hosted the Commonwealth Games?
Well, that has been certainly some criticism in the past of whether using things like their reserves, financial reserves, and whether they had the money in order to, of course, help fund those Commonwealth Games. It did bring a huge, of course, event to the city, brought a lot of people to the city, but given the situation, of course, many of these councillors, as we've now found out since the declaring effective bankruptcy, that knew about these equal pay claims, whether that was the right decision, of course, that will be challenged, of course, in this council meeting today. So the council meet today at 2 p.m. to vote on this budget. There are certain amendments being put forward by other parties, particularly the Birmingham Conservatives here are putting forward an amendment in trying to save the closure of some of these libraries as well. But of course, the financial mismanagement doesn't just stretch to equal pay. It's the implementation of a new IT system, which not only, of course, has meant that they're not necessarily always been aware of exactly what they're spending, but it was meant to cost around £30 million. It's already cost £131 million, and it's not effectively been implemented yet.
Well, thank you very much, Jack Carson there, our West Midlands reporter from Birmingham. What an utter shambles, and it's everyone living there who's going to have to pay the cost of this mismanagement. It's quite incredible. Lots of people getting in touch. Please do keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. We'll come to some a little later on.
I just wonder what will happen at the local elections, because so often a lot of these councils will just keep voting in the same people who mismanage everything.
You're saying the people of Birmingham only have themselves to blame?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying perhaps the people of Birmingham don't have a good enough choice.
Yeah, there is that. Now, coming up, Welsh pubs. Are they under threat from the Welsh Labour government? We'll speak to the leader of the Welsh Conservatives for his take in just a minute. Is the Welsh pub under threat? Stay with us.
Good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The NHS could be facing real-term funding cuts of £2 billion as the Chancellor comes under pressure ahead of tomorrow's budget. Analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests the health service could suffer a 1.2% cut in day-to-day spending across England, which would be the largest reduction since the 1970s. It could mean the health service is forced to cut staffing or pay, despite rising costs and a promise to tackle waiting lists. The warning comes after the King held an in-person pre-budget audience with Jeremy Hunt this morning at Buckingham Palace. The Rwanda bill suffered another series of defeats in the House of Lords last night, in many cases by unusually large margins of more than 100 votes. Peers backed 5 changes to the government's flagship immigration bill, including an assurance that the safety of Rwanda can be challenged in the courts. Nearly 50 amendments were put forward, with more to be voted on today. However, the scale of last night's defeat raises the chances of a drawn-out tussle between the Lords and the Commons. Downing Street says the new customs partnership led by Britain and France will make a difference to small boat crossings. Number 10 says the joint work is already delivering, with more than 26,000 crossing attempts prevented last year. It comes after more than 400 people made the crossing in 7 small boats yesterday, the highest number in a single day this year. And an agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing issue. The British Medical Association and the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to the strikes, while the Prime Minister said it's proof that seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward for everyone. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meanwhile, we've got Prince William getting on with being a real royal, or is he? I mean, this business about being ambassadorial in the Middle East, about the Gaza situation, about the Israeli situation, about trying to be friends with everyone, This is sensitive ground.
It's very demanding, I think. It must be one of the most difficult things he's ever done. He has been to Israel before and the Middle East. He was the first of the royals who went there, and he spoke to the leaders of both in Israel and on the West Bank.
Yeah.
And he managed it beautifully. He managed to carve a very sort of delicate path. I think as well, he doesn't want to cut ribbons. He doesn't want to do the ordinary things, to go round and see people and do it unless he really cares about it. This is people who are homeless. These are people who are in a war. I think he wants to go very, very high up, not for arrogance.
Make a difference in the world.
But to help, and to try and smooth things
Angela,
over.
I might be way off the mark here, but he did not, to me, look a happy man at BAFTAs on Sunday night. There was just
lonely, for sure.
Yeah, there was just something about his face that looked like I didn't want to be here.
It did. He did look lonely, but I also thought he made a huge effort so that everyone would enjoy it. He didn't want to pass it on. He doesn't use his personal feelings publicly, whereas Harry, you can tell a mile off what Harry's thinking. So he's done very well for that. And I think because he's been their president since 2010, he didn't want to let them down. Very nice of him. But he's obviously very worried about her. And he's got a lot of pressure there. I mean, he's a man with massive pressure for his father, for his wife, making sure the children are all right. And now he's taken on the Middle East, you know.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, could pints be cheaper in England? Today is the final debate on the Welsh Government's final budget for next year.
The proposed budget from 75 to 40%. And this is reportedly to invest more in Wales's NHS. But of course, takes away money from local businesses.
Well, we're joined now by Andrew R.T. Davies, leader of the Welsh Conservatives. Andrew, will a pint maybe become cheaper in England as a result of this?
Well, good afternoon, both. You're quite right. It is the vote on the final Welsh Labour government's budget here today. And the average pub will be paying £6,000 more in Wales by these changes that Labour are bringing in here this side of Offa's Dyke. So that cost has to be recouped from somewhere. And obviously, it's the customer coming through the door that invariably pays these increased costs. We'd like to see the 75% relief retained because businesses are struggling, and UK Hospitality have highlighted that nearly 20% of the hospitality businesses that existed prior to the COVID pandemic here in Wales are no longer in business. So this business rate relief increase will actually have a dramatic impact on the viability of pubs across the whole of Wales.
It does sound fairly shocking, over £6,000 extra being taxed on every pub in the land. But as the Welsh Government say, isn't this money necessary for the NHS? These tax rises that the Welsh Government is proposing, they're justifying it in terms of this is money that needs to be spent.
Well, we know for a fact, due to the Barnett formula, which is obviously the formula that's used on consequential monies that come from England into Wales, that for every £1 that's spent in England on Barnett consequentials, Wales gets £1.20 for health. But yet the Welsh Government only spend £1.05 of that. And so the Welsh Government are already getting a considerable uplift in the NHS budget. And you have to have independent businesses to create the taxation revenue and the employment opportunities to create a prosperous economy. Don't forget, there's no such thing as government money. It comes from you, me, and the many businesses and individuals that make up a country. And one thing that Labour have been systematically poor at is creating new businesses, new startups, and new opportunities. And so this is a retrograde step that will greatly impact on independent businesses here in Wales. And as I said, a pub in the Cheshire side of the border would be paying £6,000 less as opposed to a pub in Wrexham because of these changes this afternoon.
And Andrew, I'm just reading here that Wales lost over 2% of its pubs just last year, 63 shutting down. There won't be many pubs left to tax.
Well, we know it's been a difficult climate for pubs, especially as they used to be such a cornerstone of our communities, but the COVID pandemic really did change habits. And what this business rate relief change will do is make it even more challenging for many of these businesses that are trying to make a go of it by employing staff locally, creating a community hub within the villages and towns of Wales. And the Welsh Labour government putting this measure forward will increase the cost by £6,000. Many of these small business owners don't bank that money. They invest it back into their businesses to upgrade the experience that the customer's getting and create better employment opportunities for staff. And so this is a retrograde step, and it's typical of Welsh Labour when in government, they try and shut down business rather than proactively work with business to create the opportunities.
Well, it's an absolutely staggering story. Andrew R.T. Davies, thank you very much for discussing it with us. Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, of course. Really appreciate your time.
I do think, you know, governments, they see tax as this lever that's always going to be there for them to pull. You know, we don't have enough money for public spending. Oh, we'll just tax more, tax more, tax more. And they don't realise that there are actually consequences of taxing more. You've got pubs already shutting down, yes, in England massively, but in Wales, you can see the statistics. They're there for everyone to read. They're shutting down. So surely you'd think, well, one of the reasons they're shutting down is because they don't have enough money. They're not making enough money. So, you know, a bit of relief on the old taxes surely is a good thing.
Right, and so you have a struggling industry, you have lots of pubs closing down. What do? You whack a tax on them, £6,000 on every pub. It's astonishing.
I know, and with the energy costs and with the fact that consumers are changing their habits and with everything else that goes along with it, manufacturing costs, etc., 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 staffing costs, very difficult to keep a business open these days. That's why we have so many businesses going bust. More tax is not the answer, in my humble opinion.
Is it too much to ask just to have a cheap pint? Just a cheap pint.
I think it is.
At the end of the day.
Certainly down south it is. Certainly down south it is. Perhaps you at home know somewhere where it's still cheap to get one. Wetherspoons, I guess, is always available.
Up in Durham, where I was at university, the pints you could get pints for £2.
£2. Well, there you go. Can you still get a pint for £2? Let us know. You're watching and listening to GB News. But coming up, George Galloway says his party will drive Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner out of her seat. Should she be worried? Stay with us.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Yeah, so describe the contents of the letter for us, because it is quite strongly worded, isn't it? And it suggests that your property is empty. And what do they suggest it's going to be used for?
They say, as part of this process, Northamptonshire Council is identifying empty properties and sites within the area, with the aim of encouraging owners to bring premises back into use or to find alternative options for derelict sites. The resettlement team in Northamptonshire Council supports asylum seekers and refugees across 3 different projects: Homes for Ukraine, Afghan resettlement and asylum dispersal. At present, we are seeing a considerable increase in positive immigration decisions being made in favour of asylum seekers. So basically they're wanting accommodation. But who goes around and assesses whether these properties are lived in or they are actually empty?
Clearly, Ted, no one had bothered to come and look at your house at all, had they?
What do you want now? Because clearly you are both very shaken by this letter, and that letter that you've received in response has not gone far enough. Do you want an apology? What more do you want to see?
Well, she said here that she's, you know, I sincerely apologise, this Lindsay Bellchambers, but I don't see, there was no explanation as to how they've come to say this property was empty, whether it was disused, whether it was unkempt, or what. If you go back through the history of the property, it's not been empty.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Thanks for getting in touch about Birmingham City Council. Absolute shocker that council is having, and huge amounts of tax increases and basically all your services slashed.
Yeah, I mean, even lights dimmed. Jeff has written in to say, I remember when incompetent councils were surcharged and had to sell their own houses to pay for it. Goodness me.
Susie says, I live in Birmingham and have just had a letter about rent increases, and there is an additional charge on there this year for communal lighting. I'm in a block of 6 flats with 6 light bulbs, and the charge they're putting on this, and I pay... Oh, she's just being paid through the nose. I wonder if that light cost has to do with the light dimming that's going on.
Well, Ken has written in to say, why don't they just cut payments to councillors? That would add up to millions every year, when 50 years ago they did it for free. I suppose it would add up to a bit, but the deficits that Birmingham Council has, they'd have to fire all of their councillors and then some. But
yeah,
it's a sentiment that Steve in Durham agrees with. He says, I wager all the councillors have lavish pension schemes that remain untouched.
Quite possibly. Terry said Salford Council have just bought a rugby stadium, which for years they were bailing out with loans. The stadium is a white elephant, doesn't have public support, and it's essentially useless, he says. Mayor Burnham has wasted £33 million on cameras for his various schemes.
Well, Sandra says get rid of the head of the council, stop all stupid courses, i.e. diversity, etc. Make proper efficiency savings, even if you have to get rid of idiots. Now,
I saw they had an absolutely massive taxi bill. So for taxis toing and froing from various places for council work, and they were paying through the nose. They weren't getting the cheapest Ubers. They were getting, you know, expensive taxi rides, I heard.
And it's not like there's terrible public transport in Birmingham. I mean, it could be better. Maybe if Birmingham councillors did their jobs a bit better, it would be better. But it does seem extraordinary. But again, all of these things, whether it's wages, whether it's taxis, whether it's whatever, it doesn't make up for the huge deficit that this council has. It's extraordinary.
Well, in other news, George Galloway has said he wants to oust Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, from Parliament.
Yeah, speaking outside the Palace of Westminster yesterday, he singled out Rayner's constituency, Ashton-under-Lyne, where his party, the Workers' Party of Britain, could win at the next election.
He was sworn in as an MP yesterday, of course, there he is, after his by-election win in Rochdale last week.
Well, joining us now to discuss the possibility of more Workers' Party of Britain MPs is the chief political correspondent for The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Now, Aubrey, why did George Galloway single out Ashton-under-Lyne?
So I suspect that George Galloway, obviously having run a very successful campaign and now becoming an MP, wants to keep up the momentum behind him. His party, the Workers' Party, is not one that sort of polls particularly noticeably nationally. And so he is trying to sort of retain the attention that he's caught from newspapers, broadcasters over the last few days, very much trying to capitalise on that and build momentum. He knows that he can probably get quite a lot of attention for suggesting that Angela Rayner, the MP, could be under threat. Now, she had a 4,000 majority at the last election, but that was really an aberration. And in previous elections, that seat has been a lot more safe Labour. So George Galloway probably targeting her because he thinks he can get some publicity out of this. He's also said it couldn't even be a Workers' Party candidate. He could back an independent candidate. So I think this is quite sort of early stage planning from George Galloway.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it, as you mentioned, that it's not just candidates from his own party, but he'll put a lot of effort potentially into backing independents who may have links to the constituency, who may be known by a lot of the electorate. He could really put the force of his charisma, let's say, and electioneering to use, and actually it could be independents that win against Labour candidates.
He certainly does have a charisma and an appeal that's very sort of attracting to some people. And he does catch the headlines as well. But I think we've got to be sort of careful about thinking he could easily replicate what happened in Rochdale in Angela Rayner's constituency. When you look at the data, in Rochdale, according to the census population data conducted in 2021, 30% of constituents there are Muslim. In Angela Rayner's seat, it's about 10%, so we're talking a third. Obviously, George Galloway ran on a very vehemently sort of pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine stance in the by-election. At the general election, are people really going to be focused so much by a single issue? I suspect that probably the issues that poll higher nationally, like the cost of living, the NHS, potentially immigration in some Conservative-held seats as well, those are issues that are more likely to be front of mind for voters in Angela Rayner's seat, and therefore I'm not sure that Gaza will feature quite as prominently in the specific campaign in her seat at the next election.
Now, when a new MP wins a by-election, they're sort of formally introduced to the House of Commons by two members of Parliament, one on either side as they walk into the House of Commons chamber. There was a lot of speculation that one former Labour leader would be introducing George Galloway, namely Jeremy Corbyn. He, in the end, didn't introduce George Galloway, but there is a lot of speculation that some sort of Corbyn-Galloway sort of group of independents could be another threat to the Labour Party. Might Jeremy Corbyn be looking to perhaps replicate what George Galloway did at the next general election?
Certainly the Conservatives are kind of worried about being outflanked by another party on the right, and there are some in Labour wary that the same thing could happen on the left, and that if there were some joint kind of ticket between George Galloway and Jeremy Corbyn or various other sort of disaffected people very much on the left of the Labour Party, that could, if not sort of topple Keir Starmer and prevent him from getting power, then at least reduce his chances of doing so, or potentially buttress his majority so that it's much smaller. Now, I think the chances of that are quite slim. George Galloway has basically sent a message to Jeremy Corbyn saying, let's team up together. You should run for Mayor of London, for example. And that sort of thing, I think we've seen from the former Labour leader, he isn't enticed by just yet. I don't think he wants to sort of give his critics on the right of the party the satisfaction of running against Labour. However, the clock is still ticking down to election day, which means Labour has to make a final decision about who to select in Islington North. So far, Jeremy Corbyn has obviously been blocked from standing. What will he do when the moment comes where he's officially barred? That's the kind of big question.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Aubrey Allegretti, their chief political correspondent for the Times newspaper. I mean, it's quite incredible how many young people really seem to love people like George Galloway, people like Jeremy Corbyn. They seem to have the X factor.
Yes, I think in terms of very
it's
engaged...
like they're pin-ups sometimes.
Very engaged young people, yes. But I think still most young people really couldn't give a fig about politics.
Well, hopefully they don't if it means voting for them. Anyway.
Independent MP, possibly. Well, lots more to come, including those latest migration figures coming up after the news. Stick with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A messy picture today. For many, it's a fine early spring day. But there are a few heavy showers around. Low pressure is drifting away from Northern Ireland. We've got a couple of old weather fronts, though, milling around, one providing quite a lot of cloud across the east and a little bit of showery rain, and some heavy showers possible across the far southeast, particularly through parts of Kent. A bit of showery rain also drifting its way into western parts of Scotland, but a good chunk of Wales, northwest England, southwest England, Northern Ireland having a fine afternoon with some decent spells of sunshine. And in the west, it feels a bit warmer than yesterday, 10, 11, maybe 12 degrees Celsius, where it stays rather glum in the east. 7 or 8 Celsius will still feel pretty chilly, and particularly if you're caught out by one of these heavy showers across the southeast, it'll feel even cooler. They will steadily fade through the evening, but further outbreaks of rain could trickle back across parts of northeast Scotland. For many, it's a dry night, and in the west, where we'll have the highest temperatures today, we'll have the lowest temperatures overnight, and a frost likely through parts of Wales, the West Midlands, and southwest England too. So a chilly start here, but a bright start. Could be some freezing fog patches around. Just be aware of that first thing in the morning. Quite a grey day again across these eastern areas, eastern England, eastern Scotland. A little bit of rain here and there, and a few more showers then come the afternoon over the East Midlands down towards southeast England. Again, best of the sunshine in the west, although some rain could creep into Cornwall later on. Goodbye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're springing into spring and giving you the chance to win the seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won, plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package to enjoy, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GB-WIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 5th of March.
Media blackout. The Princess of Wales has been seen for the first time in months, but the British press are refusing to show the paparazzi picture. An American outlet has plastered the photos across the internet. But which is the right approach?
And the government strikes yet another deal with France in a crackdown on people smuggling gangs. It comes as new figures reveal that yesterday a record number for one single day this year illegally entered the UK. We'll be hearing from former Home Secretary Suella Braverman on this later in the programme, so stay tuned for that.
For many, it's stirring patriotic anthem, conjuring up images of Britain's proud history. But Rule Britannia can feel alienating to others. That's according to a Labour spokesperson. So, should it be scrapped? We'll hear both sides of the argument.
Should it be scrapped then, Tom? It's alienating, it's offensive, it's horrible and jingoistic.
Well, I mean, the only thing that you can say about it is that it's sadly no longer the case. I mean, we did rule the waves. Pax Britannica lasted for over 100 years. We kept peace around the world. We abolished the slave trade. We did some marvellous, marvellous things as a country. But we passed on the baton to the United States as the
I just wonder why on earth, because, you know, a lot of people say, oh, it's the people on the Conservatives that want to keep the culture war going. But then you have a Labour spokesperson coming out to say this, which obviously is going to create headlines, because people don't really like to be told that one of their favourite national songs is actually jingoistic and alienating to others. And actually, if you actually ask a normal person on the street, I imagine they either couldn't care less or they quite like the song.
It's a good song. It's rousing. I think it's a much better song than our national anthem, quite frankly.
Would you swap it? Can you imagine the...
I would totally
Can you imagine the reaction, the backlash that would receive?
I know it might be controversial to say, but I think God Save the King, it's a fine song. There are certain occasions where it should be used. But before a sporting match, it's not the most rousing song that you could possibly imagine. Whereas if we did Rule Britannia, or Land of Hope and Glory.
Land of Hope and Glory.
Oh,
now, I'd go for that.
Land of Hope and Glory, Mother of the Free.
Let us know what you think. Is Rule Britannia alienating? A Labour spokesperson thinks so. Let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. But let's get your headlines.
Emily, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Official economic forecasts are expected to be downgraded as Britain's finances continue to show few signs of improving. That's after analysts suggested that the NHS could face real-term funding cuts of £2 billion as part of the government's budget tomorrow. Analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests it would be the largest reduction since the 1970s, with the health service forced to cut staffing or pay a promise to tackle waiting lists. The warning comes after the King held an in-person pre-budget audience with Jeremy Hunt this morning at Buckingham Palace. Business Minister Greg Hands told GB News the government is being responsible.
The government intervened well and correctly over recent years, for example, during the pandemic, in terms of the supporting people to remain in employment. The fact the government paid a big part of people's energy bills over the last couple of winters. I think people support that. That is why there's been an increase in public spending. But, as I said earlier, the economy is now turning a corner, and that then sets us up nicely to be able to afford things like tax cuts.
But Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth says the budget won't be enough and it's time for an election.
It's why I think now, after 14 years of the Conservatives, it really is time for change. But I think that opportunity for change is coming, because I think there's going to be a May general election. Lots of gossip swirling around in this place about a May general election. And I think Rishi Sunak, and this is my demand for Rishi Sunak, I'm sure he's watching GB News this morning, my demand to Rishi Sunak is name the date.
Anticipation is building ahead of the Chancellor's budget tomorrow, with experts suggesting that any cuts to courts, police or local authorities may not be realistic. We asked local residents in Glasgow and in East Yorkshire what they want to see in the budget.
I'd like to see him listen to the people as well for a change. They seem to give all these promises and never keep them.
It'd be nice for the petrol to go down
and stop putting money on council tax and stuff like that. People can't afford it.
Businesses are struggling at the moment, the market's struggling, so I think they just need a little bit of a more stable background in the economy.
Raise your tax allowance, because now some pensioners are going to find themselves in a tax bracket.
Downing Street says the new customs partnership led by Britain and France will make a difference to small boat crossings. Number 10 says the joint work is already delivering, with more than 26,000 crossing attempts prevented last year. This comes after more than 400 people made the crossing in 7 small boats just yesterday, the highest number in a single day this year. That as the Rwanda bill suffered another series of defeats in the House of Lords last night, in many cases by unusually large margins of more than 100 votes. Peers backed 5 changes to the government's flagship immigration bill, including an assurance that the safety of Rwanda can be challenged in the courts. Nearly 50 amendments were put forward, and the scale of the defeat raises the chances of a drawn-out tussle between the Lords and the Commons. Police are searching for a teenager after a substance was thrown in a woman's face. Lancashire police want to speak to 19-year-old Mickey Blundell after the victim was attacked in Fleetwood at the weekend. The force is appealing for help in the search, but are warning people not to approach him. It's believed the alleged assault was an isolated and targeted attack. The victim was taken to hospital, but has since been discharged. An agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing dispute. The British Medical Association and the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to the strikes, while the Prime Minister said it's proof that seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward for everyone. And passengers narrowly escaped injury this morning when a bus crashed into a shopfront in central London. The incident happened in a busy part of the city on New Oxford Street as commuters were making their way into work. 2 people were treated for injuries, with 1 person taken to hospital. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 1, and the Princess of Wales has been seen in public for the first time since her abdominal surgery in January, alongside her mother, Carol Middleton.
Yes, this comes after it was claimed last night that Catherine's black sheep uncle, Gary Goldsmith, was scolded after signing up to Celebrity Big Brother amid fears he could spill secrets about the royal family. And he's been speaking to the Sun newspaper as well.
Well, joining us now to discuss all this royal news is royal correspondent, former royal correspondent for the BBC, and writer Michael Cole. Michael, thanks for joining us. First of all, can you explain the traditions in this country versus countries with perhaps more renegade press like the United States? Although normally it's tended to be that the British tabloids are much more renegade than the American newspapers, but perhaps the website era is different. Why are the Americans publishing this photograph, but the Brits aren't?
Good afternoon, Tom. Good afternoon, Emily. First thing to say is good to see the Princess of Wales out and about enjoying the spring sunshine yesterday. I think collectively I should start by saying we wish her a speedy and a complete recovery from her what was quite clearly major abdominal surgery back on the 17th of January. And also, it's worth saying that this photograph, which, as you say, isn't being published by British newspapers, does at least do one thing. It scotches the rumours that have been swirling around about wherever she was and how unwell she was. And maybe, Emily, I was talking to you, and there we see the princess in happier times, yesterday on this very channel, and I said perhaps Kensington Palace ought to give us a little bit of guidance to actually silence the rubbish that has been filling the vacuum, the news vacuum about the Princess of Wales. And maybe this was their subtle way of doing so. So maybe they're listening to GB News like everybody else. But to return to Tom's point, it's very, very simple. This country and the press used to be Wild West. We would publish anything. and we were just as adventurous as the Americans. In America, this photograph, which we don't know who took it, in Windsor Great Park, her sitting next to her mother in a 4x4, which was the same one, I believe, that Prince William drove when he visited her at the London clinics. That's been put on a celebrity website called TMZ. I think I gave it the American pronunciation there for emphasis. Over here, not. And that is because Charles Spencer, the late and much missed Diana, Princess of Wales's brother, Earl Spencer, stood in the pulpit at Westminster Abbey, and I was sitting within 10 yards of him, and he spoke about Diana, the huntress of classical mythology, becoming Diana the hunted, and hunted to her death in Paris on the night of 31st of August 1997. And the editors, and many of them were present, were taken aback by that. And there was a silent, maybe secret agreement with them that they would never, ever again use paparazzi pictures. Now, I don't know whether this was a lucky member of the public or a paparazzo who was lurking in the bushes in Windsor Great Park. But the photograph is out there. It shows the princess with a pair of large dark glasses. She looks pretty well, from as far as I could see, sitting in the front seat next to her mother. And they were doing the school run. They were coming back from taking the children to school. And you know, Emily, I think it's the children that has made the princess reticent about her condition. Kensington Palace put out a statement which said that they hoped, or she hoped, that the public would understand her desire to maintain as much normality for her children as possible, and her wish that her personal medical information remains private. Perfectly reasonable. And I think what she didn't want was the children going to school and being in the playground and some kids saying, "What's wrong with your mum? I hear she's got X, Y, or Z." And I think she wanted to avoid that. Now, in the past, and we remember before the birth of King George, she went into hospital with very, very severe morning sickness. And she's spoken about that since, in the hope, and I'm quite sure the reality, that it would help other people suffering from the same condition, which is quite common, but not as severe as she experienced it. So that is the division. I mean, in the past, the American press was very much more out there, fewer controls. And in this country, the British press is lightly controlled. It's mainly self-policing, but they have taken the decision on a question of taste, and they decide not to publish it.
Were you suggesting that perhaps they might be pleased that this photo has appeared on this website, so as to put to bed the idea that there's something more serious going wrong with the Princess of Wales?
Well, perhaps I'm being a little bit Machiavellian, and you are too, but it wouldn't be beyond the dark arts of public relations for that to happen. And it does actually silence a lot of the rumours, because there have been some some mad stuff on the internet, but also some vile stuff too. And I think Kensington Palace was a bit fed up with having to say it's ludicrous, it's ridiculous, it's nonsense. But if you have a vacuum in nature, nature abhors that vacuum, and in a news vacuum it gets filled with rubbish. You know, there's a wonderful thing called the internet, there's a wonderful thing called social media. Why do human beings turn it into a cross between a cesspit and a piranha pool? But they do on a daily basis, saying things which they wouldn't say to anybody's face or in decent company. And in the light of that, this is a very demonstrable way of showing that the Princess of Wales is alive and well and smiling and sitting in the front of a car. And also we've heard today from the MOD that on the 8th of June, which is 3 months and 3 days away, she will be at one of the 2 rehearsals for the Trooping of the Colour, the Sovereign's birthday parade, and she will be inspecting the troops. She is, of course, Colonel-in-Chief of the Irish Guards, but I don't think she will be at the St. Patrick's Day parade on the 17th of March, when traditionally the Colonel-in-Chief, it used to be the old Queen Mother, gives out the sprigs of shamrock to the Irish Guardsmen, and they all wear them in their hats very jollily.
Yes, we're not expecting to see her until Easter at the earliest, but I suppose it's a fortunate coincidence that perhaps this picture has made its way to the press, or to the American press, just as that rumour reached its crescendo.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Michael Cole, former royal correspondent for the BBC and writer. There you go. He may agree with you there that there's a happy coincidence
I think
here.
it is just slightly all-time too. Did you see the rumours about where the Princess of Wales was? Some of them were really quite lurid.
I don't bother reading such things.
Some of them were quite funny. There was one Photoshop saying that she was at this disastrous Glasgow Willy Wonka experience as one of the Oompa Loompas. I don't know if you saw that rumour. I mean, there were lots of
she's far too
humorous
elegant.
interpretations of where she could possibly be.
Far too elegant and slim to be an Oompa Loompa.
Part-timing as an Oompa Loompa?
No. I doubt that one, but there you go. There's fun on social media as well as nastiness. But in other news, the number of migrants crossing the Channel is now at its highest point since the crisis began.
Yes, more people have crossed in small boats so far this year compared to the same point in the previous year. The Home Office has confirmed that 401 migrants entered illegally the UK yesterday on 7 small boats. It's also the highest number of crossings in a single day in this year.
Wow, well, it comes as the UK and France agree a new partnership aimed at smashing Channel people smuggling gangs by disrupting their small boat supply chains. Home Secretary James Cleverly made the announcement following a meeting of the Calais Group of Northern European countries yesterday. Well, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us now. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We've been told, James Cleverly has said, now we've had a bit of a defeat of sorts in the House of Lords this week too over the Rwanda bill. James Cleverly has accused some of the peers in the House of Lords of being on the side of the people smugglers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was expected from the government side that there would be very significant issues in trying to get through the bill in the Lords. They knew they were in for a battle, so no surprises, but it's still deeply frustrating. And of course, the government had originally claimed that they believed Rwanda flights could be heading off as soon as the spring. Most of us that observed this particular issue very closely didn't think there was any chance of that happening, and sure enough, it's being bogged down not just by what's happening in Parliament, but once it gets out of Parliament, it's going to have to go through the same process of being tested in the courts. There might be a new law, but it will be challenged, and it will be up to the judges to determine whether that law and what the government is doing is lawful. So it will be many months yet before we're in a position where the government knows finally whether the Rwanda bill, the new bill or not, will be lawful and people can get off that flight. And by that time, of course, can get on that flight. And by that time, of course, we may be looking at an election and perhaps a new government.
And are Rwanda still all in with this scheme? Because, of course, we heard quite a lot a few months ago now about how Rwanda were maybe having second thoughts.
Yeah, well, we heard from President Kagame, actually, who seemed to be pretty annoyed with the way that his country is just getting such an absolute kicking reputationally around in the UK particularly, but clearly internationally, as it's making international headlines from human rights lawyers, international charities, the UN effectively, and parts of the UN coming out and saying that Rwanda is not a safe country to send these asylum seekers to, despite the fact, of course, that the UN already uses Rwanda to house a number of migrants or asylum seekers as part of UN programs. So there's no doubt that the Rwandan government is running out of patience. And I think if we get any significant delays again this year, as looks likely, we might be facing a point where the Rwandan government just says enough is enough.
I'm half expecting the House of Lords to say that the UK isn't a safe country the rate they're going. I mean, how many countries around the world are possibly safe if you're going to nitpick every single issue? Mark White, thank you very much for explaining all of that.
Probably not that many, to be honest. Maybe Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia.
Not all of Western Europe, though, because I'm sure there are lots of... I mean, what countries do you count in Western Europe? Some of them only very recently equalised equal marriage.
They wouldn't use that as a... Surely not.
I don't know.
Well, stick with us, because shortly we're going to be debating the song Rule Britannia. Should it be scrapped? That's what a Labour spokesperson says. Well, she doesn't say it should be scrapped, but she does say it alienates people in modern Britain. Is that true? Does it alienate people? Really? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain. We're on GB News.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Well, to cut a very long story short, I was the chaplain in a school, and a pupil asked me to preach on how come they were told they had to accept the LGBT stuff in a Christian school. I thought that was a fair question. So I said, ultimately, no, you don't have to accept anybody else's ideas. You make up your own minds. And so on topics like the marriage being between a man and a woman, biological sex being real, gender identity not making perfect sense, therefore can't be entirely true. I said, you know, you may adopt the church's position on that and respect the people you disagree with, but you make up your own mind, for which, as you say, I was reported to Prevent, the anti-terror watchdog, secular safeguarding authorities, the Teaching Regulation Agency, Disclosure and Barring Service, all of whom eventually cleared me, but I lost my job at the school, and that's why there's legal action ongoing.
It's an incredibly powerful sermon, to be fair. What do you make of Justin Welby in his current role? I've obviously rattled off quite a few things there. I mean, you've had personal experience of feeling quite abandoned. What's your view on his position?
Well, he's doing a very difficult job, in fairness to him. My personal view is perhaps he's not doing the best job of it. I'll be diplomatic about it. In a sense, I'm on the wrong side of things as far as he's concerned, I guess. Not a word of support, not a whisper from anyone in the Church of England's hierarchy for someone simply saying, you may accept the Church of England's own teaching. And I can't quite see how he can square that in his own head, but you know, he would have to answer to that himself, I guess.
I mean, the irony is that, though this is obviously through no fault of your own, the Church of England has recently baptised people who have gone on to not just be referred to Prevent, but actually commit acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, you were referred to Prevent for essentially teaching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Rule Britannia. Britannia rules the waves. Britons never, never, never will be slaves.
You enjoyed that, didn't you?
Oh, very
I thought you were going to, you know, burst into song like Andrew Pearce did earlier.
I wouldn't put that up on the audience. They don't want to hear my awfully out of tune but incredibly enthusiastic singing.
Yeah, email if you'd like me to sing it, because I'm very, very willing.
You're a lot better at singing than I am.
I'm very willing.
Yeah.
Well, a once rousing patriotic anthem is now considered alienating. That's according to Shadow Culture Secretary Thangham Debonair. Well, one person who's certainly not shy of singing is GB News presenter Nigel Farage. Let's take a listen.
It makes you pine for the days when we used to have a navy, doesn't it?
Look at that enthusiasm. You belted that out.
Well, let's debate whether or not this anthem should be scrapped, should be considered to be part of the roster of patriotic songs in this country. Joining us is author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid, who thinks the anthem is controversial, and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton, who does not think the anthem should be scrapped. Well, let's start with you, Rebecca. Why is this anthem controversial? Why can't we celebrate how Britain once ruled the waves?
So I have two issues with it. First of all, I think it's quite rubbish. The scansion is so bad. In the words never, never, never shall be slaves. You have to extend it to make it fit. It's not a good piece of writing. So that's my first issue. My second, and I was actually quite surprised. I was at an event once and I was with an Irish friend and the song came on. We were about 19 and I was kind of, going along with it. And she was like, absolutely no way would I ever be able to sing that song. And I was like, why? Why is that a problem? And she's like, it's celebrating the dominance, particularly in her specific experience over the Irish, of the British. It's a really uncomfortable sort of show-off song about how they had ownership and how they controlled things. And it particularly harks back to things like the East India Trading Company, which is a pretty icky chapter for us. So yeah, not into it.
Rebecca, surely for an Irish person, it's England that is the perfidious Albion. It was Oliver Cromwell and England. Britain is a more universal expression of these islands, surely.
I mean, that wasn't how she felt. She felt very much she didn't want anything to do with it, and she certainly didn't want to celebrate a time where the Britons felt they could go around talking about how great they were and how they owned everything. Because I just don't think... I think it's a chapter of our history that we shouldn't personally, individually feel guilty for. I don't think that we should walk around crying all day because our country did some bad things. But I also don't necessarily want to celebrate a chapter where we sought to assert dominance over other countries.
Neil, what do you make of that? You were having a little shake of your head.
Sorry to say that Rebecca was just talking a lot of unhistorical rubbish. Rule Britannia has nothing whatever to do with empire or domination over other countries. It's actually a hymn of praise for British liberty, which is preserved by the strength of the British Navy in the 1730s and 40s when this song was written. And the contrast was between England, which was largely the country in those days, only just after the union with Scotland, had preserved its liberties as a result of being able to stop foreign invasions like the Spanish Armada, whereas in the 18th century, the continent of Europe was riven by internal wars with armies invading countries who were next door to them, and all of them controlled by absolute monarchies. Britain had a constitutional monarchy, developing, of course, but nevertheless, in contrast with all our continental neighbours, Britain was a beacon of liberty for them, actually. So Rule Britannia, all it does is to celebrate the fact that Britain had maintained its own sovereignty as a nation and its own laws, and we weren't therefore subject to domination by others, rather than, as Rebecca was saying, a hymn of praise to Britain as it dominated over others. And after all, let's not forget that it was the British Navy that suppressed the Atlantic slave trade. So it's just as well that we did rule the waves in the early 19th century when we stopped the horrible tradition of slavery being exported from Africa to the New World. So I'm very much in favour of celebrating that and singing Rule Britannia as lustily as we possibly can.
Well, Rebecca, that's a good point. What's wrong with celebrating British exceptionalism?
I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating British exceptionalism. I just think that the exceptionalism that we celebrate could maybe not be about dominance and control. And I think the word slave is quite a loaded one these days. The suggestion that Britain never, ever, ever, so many nevers, will be slaves feels like an unnecessary arena, because yes, absolutely, we were instrumental in ending the slave trade, but we also directly benefited from the slave trade. And there's just so much great stuff that's British that we can sing about that doesn't need to allude to this. Like the national anthem is great. It doesn't matter what your cultural identity is. It doesn't matter what creed you are, what religion you are. You can get on board with it. It's easy peasy. Nice. Also, the words all fit the tune.
Not if you're a Republican, I guess.
Sure, absolutely, but I think Republican is, you don't. Yes, absolutely, there are plenty of them in this country, but it's not tied to any class, religion, ethnicity, or anything else. It's a personal, individual choice that you get to make And I think, yes, it probably would be alienating to Republicans, but Republicans love feeling alienated. It's a fun it's a fun activity for
It's
them.
their entire identity. Well, let's throw that back to Neil. The word slaves here is perhaps a problem.
It's not a problem for me. I mean, who wouldn't support the words of the song, which is an exhortation to freedom and against slavery? I mean, it's not Britannia rules the waves, it's Britannia rule the waves. Those were the words in the song. And it's an exhortation to us to maintain our freedoms. And indeed, as a result of our dominance over the seas in the 18th and 19th century, to extend those freedoms to other benighted folk who haven't had the benefit of British government in the past. So I personally think that Britain's history has masses of things to be celebrated. And the trouble with the left is, they're ashamed of Britain, ashamed of patriotism. I mean, George Orwell said that, a British lefty intellectual would be more embarrassed by being found standing for God Save the King than to be found stealing from a church poor box. And that's the trouble with the left. And Thangham Debonair and the Labour Party fundamentally, of course, don't believe in patriotism. Keir Starmer said, I think, on Desert Island Discs, his favourite piece of classical music was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the anthem of the European Union.
He did.
So, a party which is against British independence, because he was one who wanted a second referendum on Brexit, would certainly be against singing Rule Britannia because they're ashamed of their own country. And I don't think they're in cahoots with the ordinary instincts of the people of this country.
Just lastly, Rebecca, are the left to blame for stoking up the culture war? I mean, the right are often accused of it, but actually it's the left who want to talk about getting rid of songs that most people find unifying.
No, I'm not sure that's fair, and I don't think to suggest that the left are ashamed of this country is fair either. There is a lot about this country that I celebrated just wouldn't be the same things. I'm from the country of Emma Thompson, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the BBC, The Good Life, Felicity Kendall. I'm from that side of things. I like the creative, the lovely, warm traditions. I like the writing and the music. I like that. I just don't like the bit where we used to go to countries and stamp out their religion and tell them how to live. But there are lots of ways to be proud of being British. I'm glad that we can all have different ways of being proud to be British.
Well, there we go. At least we can agree on that one, that we all can be proud of Britain for different things.
We can all be proud of Phoebe Waller-Bridge. How about we settle on that?
Yeah, we'll settle on that. Thank you very much, Rebecca Reed and Neil Hamilton there. Oh, there we go. We covered most of the points there, I think.
We do. Although I do think I have to fundamentally disagree that Rule Britannia is a worse song than the national anthem.
She was right where it does go never. Yeah, she was right with that one.
Yeah, but it's so rousing.
It is rousing. It is rousing. I mean, see how Nigel Farage was roused there. Now, still to come.
Seen him more roused.
To cut tax or not to cut tax, the big question ahead of tomorrow's hotly anticipated budget. We'll be looking at what we can expect from the Chancellor's plans. We're also going to be hearing from Suella Braverman live on this channel very shortly too. But it's your news headlines.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Jeremy Hunt looks set to unveil a 2p cut to national insurance. That's as official economic forecasts are expected to be downgraded, with Britain's finances continuing to show few signs of improving. It's after analysts suggested that the NHS could face real-term funding cuts of £2 billion as part of the government's budget tomorrow. Analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests it would be the largest reduction since the 1970s, with the health service forced to cut staffing or pay. The warning comes after the King held an in-person pre-budget audience with Jeremy Hunt this morning at Buckingham Palace. The Rwanda bill suffered another series of defeats in the House of Lords last night, in many cases by unusually large margins of more than 100 votes. Peers backed 5 changes to the government's flagship immigration bill, including an assurance that the safety of Rwanda can be challenged in the courts. Nearly 50 amendments were put forward, and the scale of last night's defeat raises the chances of a drawn-out tussle between the Lords and the Commons. Almost 3,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel on small boats so far this year, the highest level for this point in the year since the crisis began. Despite the increase, Downing Street says a new customs partnership with France is making a difference, with more than 26,000 crossing attempts prevented last year. An agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing dispute. Unions will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to the strikes. Seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward. Fair agreement is the best way forward. A separate dispute involving junior doctors is still ongoing. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2686 and €1.1692. The price of gold is £1,676 and 35 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,639 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, you're with Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Now stay with us because very soon we'll be bringing you our exclusive interview with the Home Secretary Suella Braverman. She addresses big issues like Tory tax plans, the migrant boat crisis and even Islamism.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Meanwhile, we've got Prince William getting on with being a real royal, or is he? I mean, this business about being ambassadorial in the Middle East, about the Gaza situation, about the Israeli situation, about trying to be friends with everyone, this is sensitive ground.
It's very demanding, I think. It must be one of the most difficult things he's ever done. He has been to Israel before and the Middle East. He was the first of the royals who went there, and he spoke to the leaders of both in Israel and on the West Bank.
Yeah.
And he managed it beautifully. He managed to carve a very sort of delicate path. I think as well, he doesn't want to cut ribbons. He doesn't want to do the ordinary things, to go round and see people and do it unless he really cares about it. This is people who are homeless. These are people who are in a war. I think he wants to go very, very high up, not for arrogance.
Make a difference in the world.
But to help, and to try and smooth things
Angela,
over.
I might be way off the mark here, but he did not, to me, look a happy man at BAFTAs on Sunday night. There was
lonely, for sure.
Yeah, there was just something about his face that looked like I didn't want to be here.
It did. He did look lonely, but I also thought he made a huge effort so that everyone would enjoy it. He didn't want to pass it on. He doesn't use his personal feelings publicly, whereas Harry, you can tell a mile off what Harry's thinking. So he's done very well for that. And I think because he's been their president since 2010, he didn't want to let them down. Very nice of him. But he's obviously very worried about her. And he's got a lot of pressure there. I mean, he's a man with massive pressure for his father, for his wife, making sure the children are all right. And now he's taken on the Middle East, you know.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:39. You're watching, listening to Good Afternoon Britain, and it is the big budget day. Tomorrow we're going to be hosting a budget special.
Live from Westminster.
Live from Westminster, yes. Now, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt could squeeze public spending further in a bid to fund some of these tax cuts that we've heard about in tomorrow's spring budget.
Well, public service workers... Public circus... I don't put it past the DCMS. They'll be subsidising circuses before you know it. But public service workers, including NHS staff, teachers and firefighters, and council staff prioritising politically driven tax cuts over improving public services is wrong. What? No, good. Let's move on. Liam Halligan will explain everything for us now with On the Money. Well, Liam, first of all, let's go through what are the sort of tax measures that are being rumoured to be in this budget. Are we finally going to see some tax cuts?
I think we are, Tom. They're not going to be as substantial as maybe the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt would have wanted a few months ago, but there seems to be less fiscal headroom, less wiggle room in the public finances to cut taxes. But he is still going to go ahead with a headline cut in taxation. And the rumour mill is going gangbusters, and it's pretty clear to me, I'd say, that what the Chancellor's going to do tomorrow, he's going to cut the headline rate, not of income tax, but of national insurance by 2 pence in the pound. That already fell national insurance in January from 12%, 12p in the pound, to 10p in the pound. That was announced in November. That cut came in January, and we're going to see a further reduction tomorrow to 8p in the pound on national insurance. It's a tax in all but name, but it's cheaper, crucially, than an income tax cut. And the reason it's cheaper than an income tax cut, as you and I and Emily discussed right here yesterday on The Money, when I predicted that this would happen, is that income tax is also paid by pensioners, and income tax is also paid by landlords on the rent they receive. So if you cut national insurance, which is paid by all workers, whether or not they're landlords, and then it's cheaper than cutting the headline rate of income tax. Also, an NIC cut applies in Scotland as well, whereas income tax in Scotland is largely determined by the Scottish government. So he is going to deliver this tax cut. He is going to be able to say we've cut the headline rate of national insurance from 12p in the pound all the way down to 8p in the pound. But I still think if you add in the impact of keeping income tax thresholds where they are, so-called fiscal drag, people getting dragged into higher income tax brackets as their wages go up and as inflation goes up. I still think, I don't know, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but even with this headline tax cut, this national insurance cut, I still think the tax burden tomorrow is going to go up.
Liam, I wish they'd sort out some of the quirks in the tax system that seem to make no sense at all, particularly for middle earners and families and households, but we can talk about that perhaps tomorrow. On the public spending front, lots of people saying we can't afford these tax cuts, you're going to have to slash public spending if you want them.
Well, this takes us down to the sort of really philosophical nub of public finances, Emily, the so-called Laffer curve. When you cut tax rates, does the extra activity, the extra growth you expect with lower taxation generate more tax revenue or less tax revenue? The historical evidence is mixed. In the end, though, as Jeremy Hunt himself has said, countries with lower tax rates tend to grow faster, which means they tend to have more revenue to use on public services. It's about getting from here to there and the amount you've got to borrow to get there. But look, tomorrow isn't really about public spending. That's more in the spending review. We'd expect that in the autumn. But we do know, don't we, that 7.6 million people are still on NHS waiting lists for elective measures. That's only slightly down from the record high. We know also that in 2025, real NHS spending is set to fall if you add in inflation. It's going to fall by over 1%. That's one of the biggest drops, according to the IFS, in real post-inflation NHS spending since the 1970s. And beyond the NHS, a story that we've been covering here on GB News, a very, very important story, and I know the Chancellor's going to talk about it tomorrow. We have many councils in this country that are at risk of going bankrupt, the so-called Section 114 notice, including the biggest council in Europe, Birmingham City Council, our second biggest city, a huge unitary area, and that is going to impact public services. That is going to lead to increases in council tax, though that is, of course, for local authorities to decide. So the public finances are very, very tight. The front line of the public sector, if you like, local authorities, are bleeding red ink across the country. A lot of them have done property deals that have gone wrong. A lot of them haven't increased council tax for many, many years. But still, the Chancellor's going to go ahead with at least one headline cut to tax, but it's not income tax, it's national insurance. So we're going to be talking a lot tomorrow, guys, about the differences between the two. And I hope I've outlined to GB News viewers and listeners, for now, the essence of those differences as we prepare for tomorrow.
Oh,
so it won't
go on.
It won't impact pensioners then, will it?
No.
They won't get
cheaper.
But pensioners, this is interesting. Now it makes sense why the Tories last week said kind of randomly, oh, we're going to keep the triple lock for pensioners, right? So the basic state pension will continue to rise under a Conservative government by the highest of the growth in earnings, the growth in inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is higher. That's seen an 8.9% increase in the basic state pension coming in April. That's very, very expensive. It's 12 million people or so. So he's given that to pensioners. He's given that to the grey vote last week, and now to workers, but not to pensioners, not to landlords. He's going to give a cut in national insurance.
Higher spending on pensioners, less tax on working people. Starting to sound a bit like Trussonomics, isn't it? I'm sure they will make their sums add up some magical other way.
Money tree to shake.
Thresholds are still, of course, frozen, so
That's
people have been dragged into higher tax bands. But still to come, that exclusive interview with Suella Braverman. She's been speaking to our political editor, Christopher Hope, and he'll be telling us about what to expect. Don't go anywhere. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
We're always told that there is a huge need for care workers in Britain. We're always told that the salaries just aren't big enough against the benefit system for British people to want to do that work. And there probably is some real truth in that. And yet, if up to 25% of those that come are acting illegally, and it would seem, up until now, that in some areas, foreign care workers come in but bring in almost the same number of family members with them, that we need to have a proper debate about this. I'm very pleased to be joined by Mike Padgham, chair of the Independent Care Group. If I accept those arguments for a moment, how can it be that the system is so lax that up to 25% are found by the Inspector of Borders and Immigration to be working illegally?
Well, good evening to you, Nigel. It was good to join you. I mean, those figures are shocking to me. When I looked at it today, when I saw that 275 visas had been issued to a care home that didn't even exist, and a further over 1,000 people joined a company that only had previously 4 staff in it, it makes me wonder the bureaucracy of the Home Office didn't think to check that these companies exist in the first place, because it should be quite straightforward. If people are providing care, they're regulated by the Care Quality Commission. It's a simple phone call to check and double check. Sadly, there seems to have been very many loopholes at the beginning. I believe that's been tightened now, but I can't understand it, because all the providers that are doing it in the proper way have to go through quite a rigmarole to actually get approved, and it takes months. So it beggars belief that this has happened and people have been approved for a company that doesn't even exist.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 2, so it's time to talk to our political editor, Christopher Hope. And Christopher, you've been speaking with the former Home Secretary, but there are some huge issues to cover, not least those illegal boat crossings, higher this year now, by this point, than they were last year.
That's right. Hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. That's right. Well, I did get to the issue of small boats crossings. Of course, Suella Braverman, until last November, was the Home Secretary in charge of the policy and, in fact, drove the Rwanda plan. But before we got to that, we spoke a lot about tax. Tomorrow, of course, is the budget, as you're hearing eloquently there from Liam Halligan. Now, she's got her own ideas. And, of course, the issue, when you remove right-wingers from the top of the government, then where do they go but to GB News to say what they want, what they think the government should do? Because there's very few people who are authentic right-wingers around Rishi Sunak at the cabinet table. She thinks that the PM and the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, tomorrow should cut income tax by 2p. She thinks that the income tax threshold should go up. She wants nurses and teachers to stop paying the higher rates of income tax. She also has some interesting ideas, innovative ideas, you might say, to raise money. She thinks that companies which rely on foreign labour should pay more in tax. So tax breaks for companies that employ British workers, which is interesting, a way of dealing with net migration. She thinks less money should go to the train operators. And she also thinks that there should be other ways to raise money, cutting down on waste in Whitehall. So she's got her prescription and she set them out for our viewers today, and that interview will air on the channel from 2 p.m. today.
Tax breaks for companies that employ British workers. That's an interesting one, a controversial one. I'd like to get stuck into that, see her reasoning for that one. But looking forward to that. We're going to be showing the interview, of course, very, very soon indeed. Christopher, lots has been said today as well about the definition of extremism, the government's crackdown on extremism. There seems to be a lot of disagreement in cabinet perhaps, about how this is actually going to work.
And that's right, and the concern is going to be that when you start defining things in law, you may inadvertently ban other things which are not necessarily as offensive to some people. And that's why the law is often can be quite opaque and is left to the courts to try and interpret. She talked about small boats, and she said that, as we know, she believes this, that the Rwanda plan, which the Lords will seek to weaken again tomorrow, the Rwanda bill is back in the front of Peers tomorrow, will not do the job. She's stuck by her line, which we know she believes in, that the only way to make this happen is to make sure that those arriving illegally here can't have recourse to the European Convention on Human Rights. That's how you get a plan that will work. We'll wait and see if that does work for her, but she wasn't clearly depressed by the fact that 40,000 people arrived here by small boats since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. She was pretty grim also about the polling. She thinks there'll be very, very difficult local elections in May and also at the general election. She did say that she didn't think Lee Anderson was Islamophobic and was not a racist, for claiming on this channel, of course, that the Sadiq Khan was controlled by Islamists, language which has been condemned by the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers Jeremy Hunt and James Cleverly. So she's not holding back in an interview. I think our viewers won't want to miss it.
No, it certainly sounds like it'll be one of the moments to watch in the run-up to the budget. And just finally, Christopher, we've heard a bit this week about George Galloway's attempts to unseat Angela Rayner. Do you buy that as a possibility?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough, if that's the right term, to be right in front of that press conference yesterday outside Parliament when he says that. Now, he thinks there are around 15,000 supporters of him who might go towards an independent party in Angela Rayner's Ashton-under-Lyne constituency. Her majority there was 4,263 at the last election, down from over 11,000 in 2019. He thinks that there are enough Muslim voters there who will want to vote against her, and that could cost her her seat. So it just shows why, Tom and Emily, that this party, a Galloway's party, can be like reform for the Tories.
Yes.
Which shows pros, problems.
We'll have to
on the
see.
left.
We'll have to see what happens there. All eyes on George Galloway, at least for now. But in just a moment, we'll be bringing you that exclusive interview with the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, there. So stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A few heavy showers around this afternoon, but they're going to fade through this evening. Most of us having a dry night, some fog and frost in the southwest. That's where we've had the clearest skies through the day. Still some heavy showers across the southeast. They'll tend to drift away. A few scattered showers across parts of Scotland, but for most it's a dry night. We'll keep quite a lot of cloud in the east. That will help to keep the temperatures up here. But further west, with the clearer skies, temperatures are going to dip down close to freezing. A frost likely in rural parts of Wales and southwest England, along with some freezing fog patches. They could linger through the morning rush hour, parts of the M4 and the M5 in particular, so bear that in mind. But they should clear away, and then much of the west will have a fine day on Wednesday. Main exception to that being Cornwall, where there will be more cloud and a few showers. In the east, again, quite a lot of cloud, and we'll see a few showers over parts of eastern England, a bit of rain over the Grampians as well. A chilly day on some of those eastern coasts, 6-7 degrees, but further west, a bit of sunshine, double digits, maybe 12 Celsius. Thursday will be a similar day in that western areas will see the lion's share of the dry and bright weather. Always more clouds in the east. A few more heavy showers likely on Thursday, though, particularly over parts of the Midlands and Wales. 1 or 2 lively downpours possible. Again, where it's gloomy and glum, temperatures in single digits. Where we see a bit of brightness, temperatures should climb to double figures, maybe up into the teens in 1 or 2 places.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
We have a ton of top prizes to be won in our spring giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text prize to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock. Our top story this hour. Former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has spoken to GB News exclusively. She's spoken out on huge topics like tax, the migrant boat crisis and the Lee Anderson Islamist row.
That's coming up shortly. You will not want to miss it. And media blackout. The Princess of Wales has been seen for the first time in months, but the British press are refusing to show the paparazzi picture. An American outlet has blasted the photos across the internet. Who has the right approach?
And the government has striked a new deal with France in a crackdown on people smuggling gangs. It comes as the new figures reveal that yesterday a record number for the single day this year entered illegally into the UK.
Well, in the next couple of minutes, we're going to be going to that exclusive interview with Suella Braverman. Now, Suella Braverman rarely pulls her punches, does she?
No, it's going to be feisty. But it's also very interesting that she's choosing now, this moment, on this programme, before the budget, to make her intervention. Lots of rumours will be swirling about what her plans are, personally, for her own future.
Yes, and let us know what you make of what Christopher said. She says there should be tax breaks for companies that hire British workers rather than foreign workers. That's a very interesting proposal. I'm not sure how that would work in practice, but let us know what you make of that. Tax breaks for companies that hire British workers.
Well, gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to email. But before we get to that interview, let's get a little update on your latest news headlines.
Tom, thank you very much and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Jeremy Hunt looks set to unveil a 2p cut to national insurance as he prepares to set out Britain's budget tomorrow. The Chancellor will attempt to put the UK economy back on track and revive Rishi Sunak's polling, despite the fiscal watchdog giving the government little headroom for tax cuts. But analysts suggest the NHS could be facing real-term funding cuts of £2 billion amid rising costs and a promise to tackle waiting lists. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey says more needs to be done to help people with the cost of living.
The truth is the Conservatives increased taxes. Any tax cuts will really be a deception and a swindle on the British people, because the vast majority of people are paying much higher taxes thanks to the Conservatives. Well, what Liberal Democrats want to see in the budget tomorrow is an end to the cuts in the NHS. We're about to see the worst cuts in the NHS since the 1970s. And the choice at the next election is going to be a Conservative Chancellor, Conservative government who want to cut our NHS, or Liberal Democrat candidates who want to make sure we protect our NHS. That's our top priority.
Almost 3,000 migrants have crossed the English Channel on small boats so far this year. That's the highest level for this point in the year since the crisis began. Despite the increase, Downing Street says a new customs partnership with France is making a difference, with more than 26,000 crossing attempts prevented last year. That as the Rwanda bill suffered another series of defeats in the House of Lords last night, in many cases by unusually large margins of more than 100 votes. Peers backed 5 changes to the government's flagship immigration bill, including an assurance that the safety of Rwanda can be challenged in the courts. Nearly 50 amendments were put forward, and the scale of the defeat raises the chances of a drawn-out tussle between the Lords and the Commons. And an agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing issue. Unions will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to the strikes, while the Prime Minister said it's proof that seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward for everyone. A separate dispute involving junior doctors is still ongoing. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 4 minutes past 2 and our top story this hour. In a GB News exclusive, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has sat down with GB News political editor Chris Hope ahead of tomorrow's spring budget. Here's the full interview.
Well, it's a budget tomorrow, maybe the last budget before the general election. And with me now in GB News studio, Westminster, is Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. Suella, welcome to the studio.
Hello.
What taxes would you cut?
Well, I should say, first of all, I think we need to take a pragmatic and responsible approach to tax cuts. We need to put the British taxpayer first because we're living through a 70-year high when it comes to the tax burden. But we also need to be able to afford those tax cuts. And we can't make uncosted promises. Labour makes uncosted and unfunded promises, and we are not them. We take a prudent approach.
The Tories did once, of course, under Liz Truss.
Well, I want to ensure that our public services are safeguarded because at the end of the day, I want tax cuts, but no tax cut, however radical, will make up for the experience of people not being able to see a GP or a dentist or getting a police officer to attend a burglary. So we do need to take a responsible approach to our public service delivery and value for money for the British taxpayer. So that's the overall approach I would take.
Yes, that's the mood music. But what taxes would you cut if you could? We hear maybe 2%, 2p off national insurance, for example. Is that enough?
Well, I think personal taxes are a good place to start. Given that 70-year high, and it sends a message to the British taxpayer that we're on your side and work will pay. My preference would be 2p off the basic rate of income tax. And Rishi Sunak himself promised to take a penny off the basic rate. I would go further with 2p because I think that would really send the message that people will be able to keep more of what they earn. I think it also needs to be accompanied with a rising of the personal allowance and tax income thresholds, because we've got the invidious situation now that our tax system actually disincentivises work. It disincentivises people from taking that promotion or working extra hours. And we've got millions of low and middle earners, particularly middle earners, nurses and teachers who are being dragged into paying higher levels of tax in a way that was never intended.
Because they're frozen because of inflation.
Because in 2021, the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak froze the thresholds, and so they haven't risen in line with inflation. And that fiscal drag is really quite punitive and a real disincentive on productivity. So if we really want to send the message that work pays, that people should work harder and they should work longer, and actually they're not working for the taxman, they're working for themselves and their families, and that's what we stand for as Conservatives. A bold but affordable measure would be to raise the personal allowance and also the income tax brackets.
Yes, and cut tax by income tax by 2p.
Yes.
How would you pay for that? There's speculation about the non-dom status to be abolished or scaled back, or some measures about second holiday homes, and the fuel duty, of course, that 5p increase won't go ahead. How would you pay for it?
Well, I think there are three ways. First of all, we know that the Treasury has about £15 billion of fiscal headroom, thanks to lower than expected borrowing costs and a record surplus. And actually, we should remember the economic climate is a lot better than it was 12 months ago. Inflation has fallen, the economy is growing, and debt's falling. So I think that many of these tax cuts will be affordable with that fiscal headroom and that leeway that the Chancellor has. I think that money should go to paying those tax cuts. I think, secondly, we also need to raise revenue in more creative ways. I'm very interested, and it's something I did as Home Secretary, in raising taxes and charges on businesses that employ foreign workers. So we have already an immigration health surcharge and an immigration skills charge. I think we need to increase those charges. That would not only raise revenue, estimated to be up to £8 billion, but it will also have a benefit, a corollary benefit, I think, of lowering net migration. We know the British people have voted time and time again to lower overall numbers, and we have unprecedented numbers of foreign workers coming in. And then lastly, I think we've got to take a long, rigorous look at whether we're getting value for money for the British taxpayer in Whitehall. And I support Jeremy Hunt's war on immoral Whitehall waste, as he put it.
What's an example of that?
Well, I mean, listen, I worked with Jeremy quite closely as Home Secretary to trim the fat on Home Office spending. It's a department which has over 40,000 civil servants. I think that's far too much for the work being done by that department. But more specifically, there are things like £12 billion of taxpayer money goes towards the railways every year. Is that value for money when many parts of the country see trains which are running nearly empty and sometimes not at all because the rail companies have fallen out with their employees? Or £20 billion of taxpayers' money going towards carbon capture and storage? I think that should be largely funded by private investment with limited taxpayer funding. I don't think that's value for money. And there are countless examples of where we're not getting value for money, and a rigorous assessment would really save billions, tens of billions of pounds, which can pay for tax cuts.
But lots of ideas there. One is fascinating here. You raise taxes on companies that employ immigrant labour to try and deal with net migration. Was that an issue you raised when you were Home Secretary?
Well, as Home Secretary, I did succeed in the conversation and secured agreement with the Chancellor on raising visa fees. And so we did see about a 10% hike in visa fees. But if you look at it, it's a very inelastic demand. Numbers of visas have gone up year on year. They've reached unprecedented levels, 700,000 net migration number last year. I think it's only right that we try and attach an economic consequence to that. And so if businesses were to cover the costs of people using health services, they were to increase the tax they pay because they were employing foreign workers, I think we'd see an increase in revenue, but also see a fall in net migration.
Do you believe that Rishi Sunak is a tax cutter?
I think in his heart he is. I think he's been very prudent thus far. I think the time has come now, given the beneficial economic conditions and the fall in inflation and the growing economy, that we do need to be bold and we need to send the message, and I don't think we've quite done it yet, that we're on the side of the British taxpayer. We need to send the message that we're the party of low tax and that fundamentally people can keep more of what they earn.
And just briefly on other issues, you saw the speech on the steps of Downing Street last week from the Prime Minister. He said that extremism, he fears, is tearing us apart. What was your reaction to that?
Well, welcome words. I wouldn't disagree with his words, but I think the time for words has come to an end, and we do need to see action. The next day we saw tens of thousands of people take to the streets, chanting hateful slogans and behaving in a totally unacceptable way in many instances, overwhelming the police, notably, where police resource has been disproportionate to actually what's happening. So we need to see a step change in the police response. They need to be enforcing the law. They need to be arresting people who are using threatening or abusive language. We need to be holding the police to account in a better way. And I would have liked to have seen an emergency law introduced to actually empower ministers and empower all of those policymakers who are responsible for this issue to actually take steps to restrict some of these marches. This has been going on now for 4 months. It's become a weekly fixture. Parts of London have become, no-go areas for Jewish people. That is totally unacceptable. We've seen anti-Semitism skyrocket. That cannot be the case in 21st century Britain, and therefore it's time for action, not words.
And was Lee Anderson wrong to say that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists?
Listen, Lee Anderson is a great colleague of mine. I'm totally abhor the accusations that have been launched against him. He is not racist. He is not Islamophobic. He's calling out very poor performance by the Mayor of London, who has completely failed to hold the Met Commissioner to account, and which is why we've seen emboldened Islamism in the streets of London. We've seen an MP hounded out of office because of Islamism. We've seen Parliament totally subverted and the proper procedures abused out of fear from Islamism. We've seen anti-Semitism at record highs. I could go on.
Of course, but the remark is not Islamophobic, and there's no problem like that of that nature in the party.
I don't think Lee Anderson is Islamophobic, not at all.
Okay, and just very quickly, today we're seeing that the small boats arrivals has passed through 40,000, 46 since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Are you embarrassed by that record as a Tory?
Listen, I've spoken a lot about the boats in recent years. The priority is that we need to pass a law that actually stops the boats. I made my views clear that I don't think the law currently going through Parliament will do the job. I don't think it's going to be a sufficient deterrent. But the solution is actually ultimately to pass a law that excludes people from making individual claims, excludes the totality of international law, the European Convention of Human Rights, the Refugee Convention, which stymie our ability to control our borders, pass it via emergency measures, i.e. more quickly than is currently being done. So we get it on the statute books and we can actually operationalise flights to Rwanda on a large scale with large numbers of passengers and on a regular basis, because that's the only way we send the message that coming to the UK on a small boat will not lead to a life in this country.
It is very finely, Suella Braverman. You're 20 points behind the polls. That figure has been set in stone since the PM took over in Downing Street. Can he reverse that before the election?
Listen, the polls are very, very worrying. I just have to, in my constituency, we're facing local elections in 2 months' time, and people are very, very concerned. I worry very much for the prospects of our party, not just at the local elections, but also at the general election. But more than that, I worry about Labour taking the reins of power in this country. I think they would do untold damage to our economy. I think that they would be very weak, that Keir Starmer would be incredibly weak in terms of this rising threat from extremism. I don't think he will be able to control his party. And I think when it comes to standing up for Britain and standing up for British people, Labour will be a total and utter failure. And that's what worries me the most.
Suella Braverman, thank you.
Right, well, there's the interview with Suella Braverman. She had a lot to say about the Conservatives' prospects at the next election. She doesn't seem too confident about that. But let's discuss with Christopher Hope. Christopher, lots to say on a number. Great interview, by the way. Interesting, she very much stands by Lee Anderson. She insists he is absolutely not an Islamophobe, talking about this raising taxes on companies that recruit foreign workers. Yes. That's an interesting one. Clearly she didn't get that through the Home Office when she was in charge.
Yes, I thought you might like that one. That's right. So net migration was 700,000 last year, fueled in part by the Ukraine crisis, people arriving here from Hong Kong, British nationals from Hong Kong. But the number is far too big, and we've seen measures to control that by James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, recently on family members arriving with migrants. But the Suella Braverman, Home Secretary till last November, made clear she had tried different ways of doing it. She tried to get this idea through the Treasury of increasing taxes on companies that rely on foreign labour. It's an echo, really, I think, of Gordon Brown's British Jobs for British Workers back in the noughties. But fascinating there that it was blocked or apparently frustrated when Rishi Sunak was maybe Chancellor or before that. It's quite interesting that she thought there were different ways to try and put pressure on companies to rely on British workers. She said there that there is a skills surcharge, a health surcharge. This should be increased, that visa fees, which is all they got so far from the government, are quite inelastic in controlling net migration. It's much better, she thinks, to look at the impact that the money being spent by the health service on foreigners arriving here and get more companies to pay for that cost. Some of the ways of raising money were quite interesting and controversial also. I think trying to cut money from the train operators, £12 billion a year, is not a great look politically in a week when we have seen a huge increase in rail fares for millions of commuters, and also dealing with that £20 billion carbon capture budget that might please those concerned about net zero. So she's got some ideas. I think what's interesting, though, is Suella Braverman is no longer around the cabinet table. There's no one like her in cabinet. There's no real, authentic right-wingers around Rishi Sunak. So people like Suella Braverman have to come onto GBNews and other channels to try and get their points across. And that might be a problem, I think, for Mr Hunt and Mr Sunak when the budget is announced tomorrow.
Yeah, really interesting listening to some of those proposals around mandatory health insurance for companies hiring foreign workers. I mean, when I first heard, I think that's what she was suggesting. And when I first heard that, I was sort of thinking, goodness me, are we going to end up in a situation where foreign workers in the UK have better healthcare rights than native workers?
Well, I suppose those rights or that health support is paid for by the companies that employ them through higher taxes. So I'm not sure whether it be necessarily would go on private healthcare. It's just an extra charge on if you want to hire someone from overseas rather than someone from down the road in Darlington or Derby. That is the idea behind it. She had some defence there, didn't she, for Lee Anderson. She wants to see, I think, the remarks made by the PM last Friday on the step of Downing Street, and I was in the street as he made them, the Prime Minister, actions to follow those words. It's all very well saying you want to deal with extremism that he says is tearing us apart as a society, but where is the emergency law to ban what she would call hate marches? She says parts of London are no-go areas for Jewish people. This is language which you wouldn't hear from the government, but she's been very clear. Where's the action, Prime Minister? And just finally, a thought on the future elections this year in May and also the elections in November. She's very clear there. She is very, very worried, she said, for both elections and the future of the party. And she's very worried about a Labour government, as she would be as a senior Tory.
It was interesting looking at her words on Lee Anderson, saying that Lee Anderson as a person is not Islamophobic. But perhaps she danced around the head of a pin when it came to the remarks that Lee Anderson himself made and whether they were Islamophobic.
Yeah, and that goes to the heart of the future of Lee Anderson, of course. He's an independent MP now, the MP for Ashfield. He's refusing to apologise, and it hasn't been helped. I think there's no off-ramp for him at the moment. He's saying the words are clumsy, but he won't apologise. He's been told to do so by both James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, and also at the weekend Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. And I don't see how this is resolved. He won't say sorry. He doesn't want to say sorry. So the party's got to find some off-ramp, to use that term in Westminster, find a way for him to a form of words which allows him back into the party. So far, that hasn't happened, and it's clear that although Suella Braverman wasn't going to go there on the language used about Sadiq Khan, she doesn't think he's racist nor an Islamophobe.
Yes, it's interesting. It must be difficult for Rishi Sunak and the government at the moment. You've got two former Home Office ministers, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, very much sticking the boot in and proposing various policies. Thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor.
Well, we've got some breaking news on how the police will approach this weekend's pro-Palestinian protests. We'll be bringing that to you very shortly. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about... anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... they're not... neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting a zip.
Yeah, and also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting a top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly... Yeah. I mean, this is stuff,
she's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far-right.
But also, even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
well,
if
no,
you say
they
that,
won't,
will they?
won't.
Because you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, and the unfashionable workplace.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News.
Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 2:24. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, GB News can exclusively reveal that the policing of a huge pro-Palestinian protest in London this weekend will be no different from usual. This is despite Rishi Sunak's plea to police chiefs to crack down on extremists. No different from usual.
Well, what's going on here? Our Home and Security editor Mark White can join us to explain everything. Mark, we were expecting at least some changes.
Well, certainly that would be the indication, given what Rishi Sunak said on the steps of Downing Street on Friday evening, with very robust language saying that a line had to be drawn, that of course people could still continue to protest passionately in support of Gaza, but what could not be tolerated any longer are calls for violent jihad, are calls for the eradication of an entire state, for other messages of hate and anti-Semitism, such as the beaming projection of slogans onto Parliament. And the Prime Minister said that he had spoken earlier in that week to police chiefs, where he made it clear that the public expected the police at these protests to police and not simply manage the protests. Now, we've been speaking to sources that have suggested that the policing of the protests this weekend, and they are expecting again hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets of the capital, will be no different to the way in which it has been policed thus far. They pointed out to us that despite the robust language being used by Rishi Sunak at Downing Street, as far as they're concerned, the Prime Minister has signalled no change to legislation or public order laws. Currently, these protests are policed under the Public Order Act and, of course, under the Counter-Terrorism Act. That's the way the police have been interpreting the powers they have and dealing with the situation on the ground. Unless there is a definitive change in the law, then the way that they are going to continue to police these protests will be consistent with the way they have done it thus far.
So let's get this straight. So you can still probably project what some people see as a genocidal chant on the side of Big Ben. You can still get away with wearing a face covering that may or may not be perceived as intimidating. You can probably clamber all over statues and such things. You can have placards saying whatever, and you probably won't be, the police probably won't do anything. They'll just watch.
Well, that has certainly been the accusation that's been levelled at the police over a number of these protests, that they have not been robust enough in dealing with what many people see, quite understandably, as breaches of the law by the activities of certain protest groups. I mean, what the police will always say with regard to public order policing is it's a dynamic situation. Decisions are made by commanders on the ground. It can, of course, be a decision that is taken because they don't want to make a potentially difficult situation more volatile, especially if there are large numbers of people. But that clearly irritates and angers many people when they see breaches in the law like this. And it seems, in the eyes of many people, one law for one group of protesters, another law for another group of protesters. Let's see just what happens this weekend, despite what we're being told by sources. I think given the very understandable anger at the projection of these images on Parliament, if that was to happen again, I think there's no doubt the commanders on the ground would be going in and trying to stop that.
Mark, very often what the police say with regard to their policing is that it would be too dangerous to get involved with those that are perhaps promoting messages of hate or shouting the word jihad or whatever it is at the time. What they would rather do is collect evidence and prosecute later to avoid perhaps putting themselves in danger or creating a more dangerous situation overall, sparking up controversy and perhaps a brawl. Is there any legitimacy to that point, that perhaps it is better for police to perhaps do less policing and more detective work?
Well, I think it's a very good point that you raise, and that is absolutely a policy that the police throughout the country really will use as an operating procedure in terms of dealing with certain protests, depending on the numbers there and whether the commanders on the ground feel that an immediate intervention to stop a potential breach of the law would cause that situation to deteriorate. And you're right, what you see at many of these protests over the years, it's now commonplace to see these evidence gatherers, these intelligence gathering officers who have video cameras, still cameras. They're in and about the crowds. They're gathering as much information as possible. And then at a later date, they will identify, or at least try to identify, individuals and prosecute them. And to be fair, I suppose, to the police in that sense, we have had a fairly significant number of people who have subsequently been arrested and prosecuted since the protests that have taken place in recent months. So not on the day, but in the weeks after, such as those protesters who had the stickers on the back of their rucksacks that were showing the paragliders, a nod, of course, the prosecution said, to the paragliders that were used by Hamas to go over the border from Gaza and slaughter so many people.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult because you can't really have the government saying they want to clamp down on all of this and then have the police taking a different approach, a more relaxed approach. But thank you very much, Mark White, our Home and Security editor. I mean, Tom, it's just a bit confusing for people, isn't it? You have Rishi Sunak standing up and saying we can't have extremism on our streets, we can't have this and that, we need to stand up to this. And then the police, business as usual. I do accept your point that, of course, they don't want things to turn into a brawl and they don't want to put, safety at risk for the general public. But there's a bit of a mismatch, isn't there, between the rhetoric and the police action?
There's one other point here that I think is quite important, and that's what the Prime Minister said in his speech was, if you're going to go on these marches and you see some extremism, it's on you to stop it. There was almost this idea that there will be more announced later if these marches continue in the way in which they have been going. Ultimately, if there are law-abiding, peaceful people on these marches, and there are many, many people who aren't extremists who go on these marches, they should have the biggest motivation to kick out the terrorist sympathisers from marching beside them.
It's not going to happen, though, is it?
They should kick out the anti-Semites, and if they don't, they could perhaps expect more repercussions.
Well, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But the Princess of Wales has been seen for the first time in months, but the British press are refusing to show the paparazzi picture. We'll be discussing that and more from the royal family with royal author Robert Jobson very shortly. Stay with us, but first your news headlines.
Emily, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Jeremy Hunt looks set to unveil a 2p cut to national insurance as he prepares to set out Britain's budget tomorrow. The Chancellor will attempt to put the UK's economy back on track and revive Rishi Sunak's polling, despite the fiscal watchdog giving the government little headroom for tax cuts. But analysts suggest the NHS could be facing real-term funding cuts of £2 billion amid rising costs and a promise to tackle waiting lists. Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davies says the rising cost of living ought to be the priority.
truth is the Conservatives increased taxes. Any tax cuts will really be a deception and a swindle on the British people, because the vast majority of people are paying much higher taxes thanks to the Conservatives. Well, what Liberal Democrats want to see in the budget tomorrow is an end to the cuts in the NHS. We're about to see the worst cuts in the NHS since the 1970s. And the choice at the next election is going to be a Conservative chance to Conservative government who want to cut our NHS, or Liberal Democrat candidates who want to make sure we protect our NHS. That's our top priority.
GB News can reveal that the policing of a huge pro-Palestinian protest in London this weekend will be no different from usual, despite Rishi Sunak's plea to police chiefs to crack down on extremists. Officers currently use public order and anti-terror laws to police the demonstrations. It's understood officers will be told not to treat this weekend's protests any differently. And an agreement on a revised offer for consultant doctors in England has been reached in a potential step towards solving the ongoing dispute. Unions will now recommend the offer to their members ahead of an expected vote. The Health Secretary says it paves the way for an end to strikes, while the Prime Minister says it's proof that seeking a fair agreement is the best way forward for everyone. A separate dispute involving junior doctors is still ongoing. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
People in this field and they talk about mental health assistance. And I know from personal experience within my own family circle that the help is just not there.
I know that with speaking to many families who've got autistic children and adults. They are really struggling at the moment, whether it's to do with education, getting a diagnosis. You know, once they get to 18 to 25, where's the help? There isn't the help there with social care. You know, I just set up a petition as well, who's going to look after my sons when I'm no longer around? Because that's that's the story and the question that's at the back of every parent's mind. It's just so hard at the moment, and lots of small charities are closing. And for me, they're the backbone of the society, because they're the ones that speak, you know, to parents continually all the time, or autistic adults. So,
and why has it to be that way? And, you know, we'll get government minister after government minister coming on and saying, we have greatly added to the resource here. We've had another 2.5 people we've hired last year, and whatever. They twist statistics and they make it all sound good. But I know from the work I do in the charitable world, and I know from people who I know personally, it just isn't there. So stop telling it is. And the thing is, the demand for mental health care has just ballooned.
The earlier you start working with children who are autistic, the better the outcomes. I've seen it myself, and I know it with my own sons. I shouldn't have had to set up a school and remortgage my home, you know, for my boys. And so many parents are still struggling, like 20-odd years from when my boys were diagnosed, and they're saying it's improving, and we're talking about awareness, we're talking about acceptance. It's hard because I'm juggling caring, I'm juggling, you know, taking him to college, picking him up. You know, I'm running a charity, I'm doing events. I know I'm a workaholic, but I'm very passionate and I'm very driven.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 2 and the Princess of Wales has been seen for the first time in public since her abdominal surgery in January, alongside her mother, Carol Middleton.
Yes, it comes after it was claimed last night that Catherine's black sheep uncle, Gary Goldsmith, was scolded after signing up to Celebrity Big Brother amid fears he could spill secrets about the royal family.
Well, joining us now to sort the fact from the fiction and discuss this is the royal journalist and author, Robert Jobson. Robert, first of all, why is there this huge difference between the way that the American media approach photographs like this and the way the British media do?
Well, I think that it's simply down to the fact that the British media has agreed to be self-regulatory. You can't change the rules just because you want to put a private picture in the papers. You know, we self-regulate in the media. So, look, I think that the reality is you'll encourage paparazzi to go after the princess during her private time, if that's the case. It's a gentleman's agreement, really, and I think it's been working pretty well. And I don't think if Kate is recuperating, she should be expected to be papped. But in the Americans, obviously, because there's been so much online speculation, there's been so much many fanciful stories about Kate, and she hasn't been seen for so long. The cost and the currency of that paparazzi picture's got up enough for them to take a chance, publish it, and cash in.
Robert, could it be a good thing in some ways that this picture has appeared for the royal family? Because at least it shows the Princess of Wales is there and she's about and she must be in a recovery, and so it puts a little bit of speculation to rest, maybe?
Well, yeah, seeing is believing. I think it's all well and good people like me saying that she's doing well, or the Palace issuing statements, but until you actually see her, she hasn't been seen for many weeks, people are going to be speculating. So in a way, that the paparazzi this time has done the Palace a bit of a service, but that's not always the case.
No, it certainly isn't, although some might suggest that because these sort of paparazzi pictures are quite so rare, it does seem a little bit convenient that this appeared in the American website media just as the speculation reached fever pitch about where the Princess of Wales was. Could this have been done with a wink and a nod?
No, I don't think so. I hear what you say. It wasn't an authorised picture, but I just think that the speculation had increased the currency and the value of such a paparazzi picture, and enough for TMZ to do this. But, it doesn't mean that the tabloids are going to sort of break their own self-regulatory set up. Things have changed in the landscape of the newspapers, almost it's almost unrecognisable over the last 20 years. I mean, if you listen to Prince Harry, you wouldn't believe that, but the reality is it has changed. The editors are very responsible and want to make sure that they are still the people that regulate.
And what do you make, Robert, of this Gary Goldsmith, the uncle of the Princess of Wales, going into Celebrity Big Brother, mentioning his ties to the royal family, then speaking to The Sun, the newspaper, about how he feels about Prince Harry and what he said about the Princess of Wales before? It's all a bit... it's not very classy, is it?
Undignified.
Undignified, there we go.
Well, at the end of the day, they've come to him and they've offered him a sum of money, and he's decided to take it. As a grown man, he doesn't answer to his niece, he doesn't answer to his sister, his older sister, and as long as I'm sure he's fully aware of what he will say and what he won't say, and he won't be in any way being disrespectful. Is it any different to Mike Tyndall going into the jungle? I don't really think it is.
Well, it is a bit, I don't know, because obviously the Princess of Wales can't say anything to the media. So if he does say something that affects the royal family or affects her relationships, then she can't really say much or do anything, really, can she? So it puts her in a difficult position.
Well, if he does, and that happens, I'm sure that somehow they'll get that story out themselves. I mean, the royal family aren't backwards at coming forwards when it comes to making their position clear. They've got, I think the press offices pay salaries of about £1 million altogether, or more. So, there are people there who can answer back on behalf of the royal family. And we live in a free country. If someone's approached him to pay pay a load of money to do it, then that's up to him to decide what he wants to do. I don't think he's done anything particularly wrong. I mean, yeah, it's not classy. And I think, what did he say that? What would Kate be thinking? He said, I'm sure would she be watching? I'm sure from behind the sofa. Probably that is the case. But is he really doing anything wrong? I don't think he is.
Well, isn't there a difference between what Mike Tindall did? Mike Tindall was a sort of name in and of himself. He was respected for his rugby playing. He was sort of known for what he did. As far as I can understand it, all this guy's done is be the uncle of the Princess of Wales.
Yeah, but he was invited into. I hear what you're saying. I don't doubt either one way or the other. But what I'm saying is he was invited into the jungle because he was the son-in-law of Princess Anne, not because of his rugby playing like 20 years ago when he won the World Cup. There was no. But you know, at the end of the day, they obviously want viewing figures, like we all do, and they all want readers. And so, you know, the fact that he's spoken to the Sun, and some of the other people that are in there haven't, is because they know when they put that programme together that they're going to get viewers and clicks, and that's what the media
I mean, Robert, he's launched himself into the row over the royal racism. I mean...
Well, why shouldn't he? I mean, why shouldn't he? I mean, I think that the fact is that his niece was accused of being a royal racist through whispers and nods, and he said she absolutely isn't. Is he saying anything wrong? I don't think he is.
Although perhaps you won't appreciate it all being dragged up again. But Robert Jobson, thank you so much for talking us through these big issues. Really appreciate your time here on Good Afternoon.
Thank you, Robert. Great to speak to you.
It's going to help sell a few newspapers, isn't it? So
yes, that's
true. That can't be a bad thing. And it gets an item on GBNews, so it's not the end of the world.
Well, there you go.
It's what everyone wants.
It's the way of the world, I guess. To be fair, it probably says, you know, we should probably have a go at Celebrity Big Brother, really, and these naff reality TV shows.
Rather than the individual himself.
Yeah, I guess he's just taking advantage of it all.
I'd like to know how much
making a bit of money.
Paid, though.
Well, maybe more than Nigel got for I'm a Celeb. Of course not. Well, still to come. Still to come.
Yes, motorists are hoping for some good news from the Chancellor's budget tomorrow. We're asking, will fuel duty be kept at its current level? You're watching...
Could it go down, even? Ooh. Could it go down, even? That would be good news.
You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners. And Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do.
Or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because, you know, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it rather than... It's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So...
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
It's 2:48. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. So let's have a look at what you've been saying in the inbox this afternoon.
Yeah, Andrew says, I would like to know who is telling the police to treat Saturday's march no differently, their chiefs or ultimately Sadiq Khan, which could undermine the PM. Well, I don't think Sadiq Khan has operational control over the Metropolitan Police, although sometimes what he says does have influence, but I can't think that he's made any public pronouncements on
Well,
it.
they run things through together, don't they? Jeff says the police stating that their policing approach to pro-Palestinian marches is unacceptable. The response from the Prime Minister should publicly state that if this is what happens and the protesters are not challenged, the Prime Minister should state he has no confidence in the Met Police Commissioner and the Mayor of London, and they'll be removed from post. Well, of course, we're hearing this from the police via sources at this moment. They haven't pronounced anything publicly.
Jeanette says the police have said that they are struggling financially and logistically to supervise these protest marches. Why don't they use their power and tell the organisers that they must give 30 days' notice? Currently, they have to give 6 before each demo, that each march should be no longer than 4 hours. Also, the police should be in full protective gear. Gosh, yeah, it does get organisationally complicated, doesn't it? But perhaps a longer notice period could help with some of these costs,
Yeah, but I remember,
people around.
didn't they ban one of them from going down Whitehall? And then it went down Whitehall anyway. So that's an example of the police not really...
I don't think it went down Whitehall anyway.
I think it did.
No, on the day of the of Remembrance.
No, not on that
Saturday,
day, a different one.
They banned it down Whitehall and it didn't go down Whitehall.
But there was a different one where they didn't want it to go down Whitehall and then it did anyway. We'll check and get back to you, but I think I'm right on that one. And Julie says, why is no one mentioning that all these marches every weekend are stopping people going into London for pleasure and hurting the London economy? That's a very good point indeed. Some people just don't want to go into the shopping district at all.
Well, speaking of people moving around, motorists have seen fuel prices rise over the past year. That's according to the RAC.
Yes, this comes as the Chancellor is rumoured to freeze fuel duty for another year in tomorrow's spring budget, a move that presumably will be welcomed by motorists, but it's predicted to cost the Treasury around £5 billion.
Well, joining us now is Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK and also the Reform Party candidate for the mayoralty of London. Now, Howard, just to explain how things work here, the assumptions of the Treasury, the way that they helped balance their books for this spending period, is they assumed fuel duty would rise by around £5 billion for the coming year. Now we're hearing rumours it might not.
Yeah, I think it's more than the rumour, Tom and Emily, and good afternoon. Nice to be on your show. The fact is the Sun wouldn't go big with an article like that, a double-page spread to say fuel duty is going to be frozen again, or the 5p that was actually given to us 2 years ago by Rishi Sunak is not going to go back up again. And we've got a year of stabilisation. But bear in mind that Jeremy Hunt won't be Chancellor and he won't be in government. I should imagine Labour will put it back in their first budget. But it'd be churlish for me not to actually say I'm really pleased that we're freezing duty. I managed to get 40 MPs and some heavyweight MPs, Priti Patel, John Redwood, Ian Duncan-Smith, and also a peer of the realm, David Frost, to sign a letter that went to Jeremy Hunt to say, you'll be mad to put it up. In fact, we would prefer a cut. So part of me, I'm very pleased because it's been frozen, but we should have cut it even further.
And it's not just fuel duty, is it, that's costing motorists? You've also got the astronomical rises in insurance costs.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, I've just renewed my insurance and, I'm 70 years of age, never had an accident, everything's perfect. I've been driving for 50 years and, it's ridiculous. My insurance was about 500 quid. It's now gone up to 1,100 pounds. And I've shopped around and I managed to get it down to about 900. It's still gone up, 80%. And that can't be right. And I'm looking at that, and people are asking me to campaign on that one, but I'm pretty stretched at the moment, fighting the London as well. So.
You're a busy man. I mean, I've heard that some cars are basically uninsurable now. It's so difficult to get insurance for some models of cars, even not that expensive vehicles.
No, I know. I'm hearing all sorts of things, and it depends on the insurer, though, Emily. I mean, you're dead right to actually highlight that sort of thing. But electric vehicles, for example, they're ones particularly are being high. The premiums on those are going up even more so, simply because of this rumour and the threat of the fact that they're explodable devices down the streets of London and various places across the country. But look, the budget's tomorrow. We still don't know exactly what's going to happen. You knows he might pull a rabbit out of the hat and say there'll be a 5p cut. And and Emily, I heard you say before the break, maybe there's a cut, that'd be good. Well, you and I will go and have a celebratory bottle of champagne if it happens.
Well, we'll be watching with incredibly tentatively for around 12:30 tomorrow. That's when the budget will be delivered, when the Chancellor gets to his feet. But for now, Howard Cox, founder of Fairfuel UK, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, that's it for Good Afternoon Britain. Thank you for joining us, but not to worry. Martin Daubney will be bringing you all the latest between 3 and 6. He joins us now. Martin, what's coming up on your show?
Well, that Suella Braverman exclusive, packed full of red meat moments. Less tax for Brits, more tax for foreign workers. Talks about Lee Anderson and soaring anti-Semitism and two-tier policing. Rishi Sunak says, please steam in. Sadiq Khan says, please stand down. We have clear politicised policing, plus the image that shames Britain. A homeless woman just yards from an asylum hotel in Farnham. Jeremy Hunt's seat. That's coming up on the show. But first, time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Afternoon. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A few heavy showers around this afternoon, but they're going to fade through this evening. Most of us having a dry night. Some fog and frost in the southwest. That's where we've had the clearest skies through the day. Still some heavy showers across the southeast. They'll tend to drift away. A few scattered showers across parts of Scotland, but for most it's a dry night. We'll keep quite a lot of cloud in the east. That will help to keep the temperatures up here. But further west, with the clearer skies, temperatures are going to dip down close to freezing. A frost likely in rural parts of Wales and southwest England, along with some freezing fog patches. They could linger through the morning rush hour, parts of the M4 and the M5 in particular, so bear that in mind. But they should clear away, and then much of the west will have a fine day on Wednesday. Main exception to that being Cornwall, where there will be more cloud and a few showers. In the east, again, quite a lot of cloud, and we'll see a few showers over parts of eastern England. A bit of rain over the Grampians as well. A chilly day on some of those eastern coasts, 6-7 degrees, but further west, a bit of sunshine, double digits, maybe 12 Celsius. Thursday will be a similar day in that western areas will see the lion's share of the dry and bright weather. Always more clouds in the east. A few more heavy showers likely on Thursday, though, particularly over parts of the Midlands and Wales. 1 or 2 lively downpours possible. Again, where it's gloomy and glum, temperatures in single digits. Where we see a bit of brightness, temperatures should climb to double figures, maybe up into the teens in 1 or 2 places.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're springing into spring and giving you the chance to win the seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won. Plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package to enjoy, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 £245 in tax-free cash. Text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell